Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, babies and citizens, this joy to the world. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, babies and citizens, this joy to the world. I bring a message of the truth amidst a world full of lies. I graduated from learning lies to seek the truth. Indoctrinated to be too blind to see the proof. I once was lost, but now I'm found, so I shine light. And everywhere I go is darkness, so I shine bright.
When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him, and the son of man that you care for him? That's Psalm 8, 3-4. I'm Wes Blaze, once was lost, but now I'm found, and this is Uncommon Ground. We thank you for joining us for episode 27, and we're joined as always by my fellow future immortal, Sean Juan, the Context Don. What it do, big bro? Oh, you're muted, brother. There you are.
Hey, WesBlaze, I'm glad to be back again this week. I think we got a fun show lined up, and this is episode 27. That's a full season plus 2 episodes. We're rocking and rolling.
That's right. That's right. Last episode was what in the heavens, and so we got to talk about something else that's in the heavens, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a dream
that sometimes confuses people.
It does.
They try to get that confusion sorted out tonight.
That's right. That's what we're here to do for you guys. And it's a dream come true to do what we do every time we do it. And I'm thankful to get to do so with you, bro. I'm also super grateful for everyone who joins us in the live streams. A big 7-dome shalom to the family in the chat. Bless you guys. Do you see any names we can shout out, brother?
Oh, for sure. We got L. Wilkins 25 is back. Hello, hello. Tyler Porter, Carrie M, Aaron H7, David Lucy, Mama Lou Bear is back. Cat Lady Forever. That is forever. Cat Lady. Truth is Criminal, James Henry, Daniel Tocode, Miss Joy's back, G.R. Cleve, Mashai Kim is back. Nice. James Owens with Twixt the Waters, Chico, 1985. It's an important year for Chico. We appreciate you coming back, brother. And so many more. But yeah.
There are Miss Wildly and Popular is here as well. Carrie M, yeah. Good to see you betwixt the waters. Tyler Porter. Much love, everybody.
Welcome back. Y'all are here. Is here. What's going on, brother? Caleb Brooks is here too. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, well, so what are the people saying, brother? What is some UG love we can spotlight? We get some comments all the time, and I'm just overwhelmed and thankful to hear the responses and the feedback. And so we always want to show some love back to you guys. This is from, is it the Bedouin?
I think so.
Yeah, he says, love the show. Oh, love the show, Brother West and Sean. Truly edifying and so well presented. The magnificence of his glory and what he has prepared for us is truly beyond measure. The Father Yahweh bless you both. Thank you, brother.
Nice. Thank you, brother. And I think that's, I think you say Bedouin.
Bedouin.
Yeah. I mean, tomato.
Yeah.
But so, Kristen Dickinson, she's also a fan of the show. She was saying definitely a huge impact. Always loads of information, easy to understand. A great program to add to homeschool lessons for nearly any age. We've actually been seeing people talk about that a bit, haven't we?
We have.
Talking about homeschooling people and actually showing them our content. So can you imagine when you were young if you'd just seen something like this?
It would have been so much more fun than Bill Nye the Science Guy for me personally, I feel like.
I hear you. She says, you guys always explain things in such a loving way. Abba is truly blessed. The two of you. Praise Yah. Thank you, Kristen.
We praise him indeed. You are appreciated, ma'am.
Yeah.
We got another comment that was from a brother who wanted to do something a little different. And he does this often. Like I'll follow him on Facebook. And when he responds to people, oftentimes he'll do video, comments, video responses, which is so unique and personal. And it's so rare that you see something like that. And it's a lot harder for people to get uncouth and out of pocket when you're talking to somebody that's showing you their face and speaking words to you like that live. So we want to hear what he has to say. He had some nice words for us.
Hey, brother. Thank you so much for your visual teachings. I obviously love them. I steal them quite often from you, but I always try to give you credit. You know what I mean? So, yeah, thank you for confirming and giving the multiple scriptures. It's everywhere. Yeah, keep it up, brother. I love when you come by and drop your wisdom and your knowledge. And I'm actually in the middle of watching your guys' last podcast you did, Uncommon Ground. So I still got to finish it up. Bless you guys. I'm actually, when I sit the phone down, I'm going to lift you and Sean up and ask that he bless your ministry and you guys bust through that YouTube algorithm. Many blessings to you and yours.
Many, many blessings to you and yours as well, Mr. Josh H. We appreciate you,
Thank you,
sir.
Josh. Yeah. Yeah. And that is quite the Goliath of our day is the YouTube algorithm, guys. So hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and be sure to hit that bell so that you're notified next time we go live, or at least that's what we pray and believe with faith that you'll be notified. But as always, guys, I've talked for a long time that there's an alternative social media coming out called Lighthouse, and it is still in the works. And I'm a part of that project, and I can tell you and verify 100% it is still coming. And so get ready for that this summer. We're excited. We're excited.
Hashtag better is still coming. I'm excited too, brother.
Yeah.
Long time.
So we don't have to worry about the oppressive algorithms once Lighthouse is here.
That's right. That's right. And another way you guys can help us to get around that is to share this link. You're welcome to mirror this link to any channel, any website that you guys might use as well. But if you would just share this to maybe a friend, a family member in a private message, you could even post it on any social media and lead people to what we're doing. We'd appreciate it as well.
That's right.
Also,
there's another way to share.
That's right.
Another way to share. You can take the entire season 1 with a donation to Uncommon Ground, and you can actually give them a thumb drive in its entire season 1. That's 25 episodes.
They can, and by popular demand and upon request, we have made season 1 of Uncommon Ground available to own offline in a hard copy, a USB flash drive that you can plug and play on your own TV and home devices. This gift is yours for a minimum donation of $49, which does include shipping. And links are in the description of this video below. Be sure to include your shipping address in the note along with your payment so we can get it to you. But also, that's available for you guys. We also have the merch, the swag. Here's a purple Uncommon Ground shirt. Y'all can see the link in the description for this as well, where the store is available for you guys to get a Firmamentalist shirt, an Uncommon Ground shirt. We even have Fight the Good Fight hoodies and shirts that's available for you guys. Check those out in the link below in the Uncommon Ground Teespring store. Otherwise, next week, we're going to randomly select from our viewers who support us through Patreon some recipients of whichever single one of these items that you guys want to take home from the Teespring store that you should choose. If you don't win this time, though, there's a growing selection of conversation starters available for you guys in the store, and we will announce giveaways again in the future, so stay tuned. But yeah, link in the Patreon, a link in the description for you guys to set up with Patreon, where if we select you next week, you'll be able to tell me whichever one of these items from the store you would like, and we'll get that to you.
That's right. Yeah, it's really cool that we have so many options that people want to support the show, but you actually get something back at the same time. You know what I mean? So it's really cool. Hopefully people can enjoy it, and standing in line at the grocery store, people looking at you going, geocentricity, no sphericity. What is that? What's that all about?
What is
that? It will start a conversation. It will.
Yeah.
It will.
Get the words in the shape of a dome here. Is that the sun and the moon?
What is
I gotta talk to you about that guy.
What does firmamentalist mean? Is that some weird cult? No, it's where you live. It's where you live.
I like it.
But
yes, sir.
Yeah, brother. We have an exciting episode this week.
I know. Is not God in the height of heaven? Look also at the distant stars, how high they are. That's Job 22:12. If you could cue up the teaser, please, sir, because tonight we want to discuss a certain class of stars in the heavens above. Historically, these were known to many cultures as wandering stars, but today the majority of the world has been taught to call them planets. So here's a clip to tease this episode for you guys tonight. Enjoy.
The first mission is scheduled to land on Mars on July the 4th, 1997.
I believe we can send humans to orbit Mars and return them safely to Earth.
We will plant the American flag on Mars.
The next place for humans is Mars.
We can land a rover on Mars. All the dreams you've created in other people's minds.
That's right. Episode 27 of Uncommon Ground is all about planets, right? And it's time we address this topic because these luminaries in the firmament are part of God's creation. And like most everything else he has done, said, and made, they get misrepresented and lied about
That's
extensively, right?
Yeah.
And so when this term planet is invoked, something very different comes to mind than what the Most High God has described about his creation. So we want to welcome you guys to tonight's episode. What are your thoughts opening up, brother?
I just think people are going to be fascinated with the most basic hermeneutic that we always try to apply to scripture, which is looking up the definition of words. So what happens when you look up the definition of this word we've received in English called planets? You start to see, wait a minute, are people using this right? Like why did they choose this word for this concept? Like what's going on? In the context of the whole show we do, looking at the definition of this word tonight, I think a lot of people will be super surprised, as well as some of the scriptures that help us understand why this deception is being pushed on people. So let's jump in. I'm excited.
Very cool. Myself as well. They've even been in the news a lot lately, right? Among the different articles, we have Fox News reporting on the alignment of 4 planets in the sky just this last week, the other week here, week of April 24th. So Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, or rather the luminaries that have been called those things, were visible all at once in a line. Which, if you guys would go back to episode 2 of last year's season 1 of Uncommon Ground, we did geocentricity, no sphericity was the title of that episode. We covered a unique aspect of how it should be impossible to see both Venus and Mercury in the night sky because of how we're facing away from the alleged sun. And we broke it all down, gave y'all visuals, and check that out because that's another proof that you can point out to people that believe the globe theory. Nonetheless, we had another one here where they were in the news talking about how, both Jupiter and Saturn were, they talked about how they were going to collide. It was Venus and Jupiter, I'm sorry, collide. And there's a conjunction going on there to where they're popping up in the news.
Yeah, that's what they mean. Not like a literal collision, like a car wreck, but just like from our perspective, they kind of come into an alignment, with each other and have a crossing of paths, if you will, from our visual perspective from the ground. And so, of course, they've trained people since birth to think that these luminaries we see shining in the sky, no matter how they cross the paths with each other, people have been trained to think that this is happening in some grand void of space this whole time, Wes. Right. So that's the interesting part, because I think that our Creator, through his scriptures to mankind, says something very different. And we'll jump into that tonight.
He does. Yeah, for the past 2 years, I've lived out in a rural kind of countryside kind of town to care for my grandmother. And we don't have a lot of light pollution. So like you'll see in the big cities. And I've gotten to the point where I can step outside and when I see the sky is clear and I can point out these wandering stars by name. And it's cool because they're oftentimes especially bright in comparison to the other stars. And they, of course, have their own unique paths, which we'll talk about tonight as well, against the backdrop of the fixed constellations. So they've become increasingly easy to spot the more I've looked at the dome of heaven, specifically late at night and early in the morning. And but here's what doesn't come to mind. Can you pull up that planetary scale clip, bro? I think it's silent, so you can play it while we talk.
Okay.
But when I look at these luminaries that are in the sky that are known as planets, here's what I don't picture anymore, right? I see these lights in the sky, just points of light in the firmament, the ceiling above, and most people would see those and they picture these kind of things, many times bigger than the Earth, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and then the sun massively bigger than all of those. But I don't picture that anymore. Do you, bro?
No.
I did growing up.
No. And it was interesting though, because it took a moment for me to realize that the reason I pictured that was because I was told that, I was shown cartoons of that, animations, movies, TV shows. But literally it's just guesswork. As far as when you research the history, and even though, we're not going to branch out on some of the history of how they chose distances to the sun. We talked about that last season in episode 7, but it was literally guesswork with Venus, about them just guessing the distance of Venus. And then they would extrapolate from that guess the size of the sun and then the distances of the other quote unquote planetary bodies in this solar system circular orbit around the sun, all of it based on a pure guess.
Right. And we pointed out that their assumption, Christian Huygens, I believe was his name, his assumption was based on the assumption that Venus was a physical spherical body like the Earth is, similar in size. And so he used that to judge Earth diameters to the sun, all based on assumptions, like Sean says. So check out episode 7 for a breakdown on that. However,
it's pretty weird, man. There's just how much they enforced over time, just with it all being an assumption. It's just crazy.
Right. This past week, people were super surprised that, 4 planets, so-called, could be visible, lined up in the same visible pieces of the sky. But it's kind of something that happens every few years, with a string of them, at least. Since, here's January 20th, 2016, 5 of the planets were all visible in a line in the same sky. What's that? Jupiter, Venus, Saturn.
Yeah.
These are the 5 visible ones. That's right.
Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, Venus, and Mercury.
And these are the ones that are visible to the naked eye that coincidentally the Greeks, they only held that there were 7 major luminaries of the heavens outside of the fixed stars, and they included these as well as the sun and the moon. If you'll go to the next slide, there was a chart.
You mean they didn't include Pluto?
No, nor Neptune, nor Uranus. So these 5 here, including as well as the sun and the moon, were in their order of this geocentric cosmology that some of the Greeks had. And you're right, we're told in modernity that the Greeks knew, since 2,000 years ago, that the Earth was a sphere and it was heliocentric, but many of them still held to a geocentric cosmology, if not the majority of them. Whereas they had, it says Luna, Mercury, Venus, Solus, the sun, Martis, Mars, Jovis is Jupiter, and then Saturn, and then it's hard to tell, I'm sure, but it says firmament on the one above that.
Yeah,
so they had an enclosed cosmology idea as well too, with fixed stars there as well as the other luminaries. But we wouldn't hold that these luminaries are beneath the lowest firmament, would we?
I personally don't, because of the descriptions that we've covered in Scripture.
Right. Yeah. And we'll see another one of those again tonight.
Yeah, I know that there's different ministries out there that also talk about biblical cosmology, and they try to say that the sun, moon, and stars are beneath the firmament that encloses the Earth that we live on. They're just really high up in the altitude. We don't fall. Let me say this the right way. We don't subscribe to that because of the descriptions that are given in Scripture. And I know a lot of people will instantly, they're looking for their photo or their image right now from those videos where it looks like the sun's going through the clouds,
Yeah.
But guys, we've talked about that in the past about, the saturation level of the water in the clouds can create that effect easily because the sunlight just shoots right through the cloud and you'll never see the cloud. So if it's more dense around it, it's a visual perspective issue based off of the amount of water in the cloud, basically.
Yeah.
So that's because the descriptions of the clouds in the sky are in the Scriptures is within the open firmament where the birds fly, but the actual luminaries are described being having their own enclosure, having angels that are in charge of how they move in the circumference in the heaven, as according to 1st Enoch. And these are actually in the layers of the firmament above. They're not in our observable sky where the birds fly.
Well said, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's right. What was the next slide? Yeah, so another picture of what doesn't come to mind. And here is a perfect statement to summarize what doesn't come to mind also when we think of the creation that the Father made and how it juxtaposes or contrasts, I should say, to what gets taught commonly by academics and culture today. And this quote is from Carl Sagan, a very famous atheist, staunchly opposed to the Father and everything he's created, the truth of everything he's created, at least. He says, each of us is a tiny being permitted to ride on the outermost skin of one of the smaller planets for a few dozen trips around the local star, says Carl Sagan. And I like to think that we're a little more important and significant than that. And especially considering the truth of the creation, that we're not going around the sun and we're not, just on one of these smaller planets. I wouldn't even say Earth is a planet. What about you, Sean?
No. Yeah, it's this kind of language that Carl Sagan began in the public media is what has been picked up and expounded upon by other people like Bill Nye and like Neil deGrasse Tyson, where they also refer to us as an accident in the cosmos, in an insignificant spot in an insignificant universe, and that we are essentially insignificant because we, in the grandness of the cosmos, that we really don't matter because we're just a clump of cells that here by random evolutionary chance. So this was Carl Sagan was kind of the. And by the way, Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson, they talk about Carl Sagan being their hero, right? This guy influenced them greatly when they were kids. But that's how lies are passed down generationally, right? You get one guy on TV with way too much Justin Bieber hair sitting on a rock going millions and millions of years in the cosmos, and then some kid watching that who's bored at the house, he thinks that that's cool, and then suddenly he wants to be an astronomer and work, in the New York City Museum as a astrophysicist and make up theoretical ideas all day, and then go on TV shows and talk about them as if it's fact, but it's not. You know what I'm saying? While he wears his sun vest. So the whole point of all this is that these are lies that are perpetrated in order for you to not understand you were created and that you are considered special by your creator. So that's a philosophical level of how they apply this model to your mind and your heart in order for you to be subjugated to their lie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want us believing that we are a very temporary, ultimately amounting to nothing, floating around on a speck of nothingness through infinite nothingness and darkness, with infinite potential and unlimited potential for other planets and life forms on the road to nowhere, and specifically with a gruesome end of a supernova explosion of the star that they call our sun, and the end of life as we know it. that is the setting and the plot line of the heliocentric cosmology. But we are much more important than that, more significant and more meaningful, and we're much more loved than this model would have you believe in the philosophy that they push behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is what blows me away, brother, is that even believers, people that think the Bible is God's truth given to mankind, they will defend this model and not know where it came from, and then not realize that the people that propagate this model, NASA included, which government-funded agency included, they outright reject the idea of a creator, and much less a savior, his son, right, who came to die for us, be our high priest and resurrect us. They outright reject that whole story. And so it baffles me that someone that can believe in the creator and think that his word is truth to them so they can have salvation and have their sin atoned for and have fellowship with God, at the same time can engage in double-mindedness and then look and just pull from what they've been taught about this model of heliocentricity and think that it's true, and then try to squeeze that into the Bible somewhere, right? Because ultimately what comes along with believing the actual words in the Bible, which debunks the model we have on screen here, is persecution. You get people making fun of you. You get people calling you a tinfoiler, calling you crazy, conspiracy theorist, calling you dumb, unlearned, unschooled.
Go jump off the edge.
Math or algebra. Yeah,
don't procreate.
Reproduce.
There it is.
Yeah. So like you get all this type of weird persecution, social shaming. But it's so funny because those same people that social shame you would also think you're ridiculous for believing in the resurrection and Jesus Christ was a real person who came to live and die for you. So
which is historically validated. Yeah,
that too. But like, so why suddenly this topic and Christians get all shy? You know what I mean? It's like, why don't let's believe the whole Bible because it makes sense within the story and the framework.
Yeah, exactly. Most Christians can admit that they understand there's a difference between the evolution theory pushed and what Scripture describes as creation, but they'll rarely go from there to realize, hey, there's a whole creation model taught in the Scripture that's different than the Big Bang cosmology that's produced for us. But
yeah,
what was the other slide we have for them? Yeah, let's get into some Scripture. Let's see what the Father has to say about it in His Word. This is the Book of Jubilees. We've introduced it many times on this show, but highly recommend. Great read. It was included. If you or I had lived in the Ethiopian area and were believers in the last 2,000 years, really, right, Sean? This book would have been a part of our canon of the Bible, right? And it has been for other cultures as well across the world and throughout time.
Yeah, this is an amazing book, and it's considered scripture by many other cultures, and it's only in recent history that people have, thought it's somehow extra biblical, pseudepigraphal, deuterocanonical, and thought that it doesn't have any good information. But all of its information actually lines up with Genesis and the rest of the books that we have in the Scripture.
It does, because as we'll read this, it is paralleled in Genesis 1, 14 through 19. Many will recognize, but it says, Jubilees 2:8. And on the fourth day, he created the sun, the moon, and the stars, and set them in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon all the earth, and to rule over the day and the night, and divide the light from the darkness. As I said, paralleled in Genesis chapter 1, 14 through 19, as well as 2 Esdras 6:45 talks about the fourth day, with the sun, moon, stars being created and set in the firmament, which, as we've covered many episodes, that the firmament is a solid domed structure, vaulted dome, as according to the definition and the consistent descriptions throughout Scripture of what the structure of heaven really is and looks like. And so when, as we covered a moment ago, when it says set them in the firmament, we wouldn't hold to the idea that that's underneath the lowest firmament enclosing over our heads, but in the layers of the firmament. And we'll see what specific layer, specifically the stars, were placed in here in a moment. But would you read 2 Ezra 16?
For sure. It says here, behold, the Lord knows all the works of humanity, their devices, their plotting, their hearts. He said, let the earth be made, and it was made. Let heaven be made, and it was made. At his word, the stars were fixed in their places, and he knows their number. He examines the abyss and its treasuries. He measures the sea and its contents. He shut up the sea in the midst of the waters and suspended the earth over the waters by his word. He stretched out the heaven like a vaulted ceiling and sank its pillars into the waters.
Very nice. Thank you, sir. Yeah, so stretched out the heaven like a vaulted ceiling. And that's what we were saying it is. And sank the pillars of the heaven, sank its pillars into waters, right? Reminds me of, is it 2 Peter? You know, they forget that the world is surrounded by waters and was made out of waters.
Yeah, it was made in and out of water. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Can I take this one?
I will. So this is Apocalypse of Abraham, chapter 19, verse 27. We read this in episode 1 last season as well, but this specific part is appropriate to this topic tonight, that he commanded that the sixth firmament should be removed from my sight. And I saw there on the fifth firmament the powers of the stars, which carry out the commands laid upon them, and the elements of the earth obeyed them. So the stars, the powers of the stars, specifically in the fifth firmament. Interesting.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah, it's starting to make sense now.
It is.
Especially when we have a visual model like this. There's someone in the chat talking about, do we have any curriculum or is there any FE information for children? And I'm like, well, here we go. All these slides we're using tonight. I think most children, if they have a basic 5th grade reading level, they can follow these scriptures. That usually about 10 years old, you can read most of the words that we're reviewing in these scriptures. But we also have some visuals that Wes has made, which I think are pretty awesome. Now, this is also, is this some added visuals you put onto what Eric Rice made?
I was just about to say that. Shout out Eric Rice. He's usually in the chat helping us out on the Firmamentalist project. And he created just the base here of the domes. And I added some other little graphics in to fill it out. And so thank you for his help with that. But yeah, we did an animation of this last episode. Go check out episode 26 of our season premiere, episode 2 of season 2, where we had a breakdown with the animation and we did a visual tour of this creation model. But just to kind of show you guys, if you can notice in the fifth firmament, right, the top is the seventh, the Father in his temple is sitting next to the Son. Below that, we have some angels and their homes. And then in the heaven immediately below that, you see a bunch of sparkles. Those are to represent the stars. And so that's where we would hold that the wandering stars even are.
Yeah. Yeah, that we see because they do seem to want, quote unquote, wander behind the sun. And so this is why this would make sense, as well as behind the moon. I know we're not really getting into this, so we don't have to rabbit trail too long or anything. I just want to make a quick note that you've noticed the water, right? That's what the word heaven means, is a covering of water. And that's why the firmament that's created directly over the earth, and the one that's encapsulating the earth in Genesis 1:6-8 was considered, that structure of firmament was called the heaven. And that word in Hebrew, heaven, is shomayim, which does mean a covering of water. Yeah. So from a science perspective, I've always wondered about the power coming through the sun that radiates down onto the earth. That type of power from the sun needs a buffer. And when you put that through water, it buffers the radiating harmful radiation out of it. till we just get the pure light that comes through it, if I could put it like that.
I like
So
it.
this to me makes perfect sense from a scientific perspective as how water is an insulator against harmful radiation to mankind. And if we were created different, which we went over this, I think, in episode 24 last year, but we were created different than the angels above. They can handle that type of power. We can't. We got, especially me, I'm white, right? Even though I've got Native American background, I adopted my dad's side of the family with my skin tone. So I got the white boy skin, and it burns easily. So I appreciate this covering of water, this protective barrier that we have between us and the sun. And I also think this is why whenever we do take a telescope and we're looking up through the water at the stars, they sometimes have this twinkling effect.
Yeah, that makes
because
a lot
that's
of
the
sense.
way they look when they're lights shining through water.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, well said, because I've thought of it like that too, that it's kind of a buffer and a insulation, if you will, from not even just the sun, but the radiating holy power of the Father and the holy beings above, that we would need some sort of insulation from that in our fallen state.
Yeah, for sure. Be a nice protector. Was there anything else on this graphic you wanted to talk about?
Not necessarily. No, not this episode. Just wanted to remind people that is what we believe. Whereas all too often when we start relating the nature of the earth and the nature of the luminaries in the heavens to people, and we start trying to convey what we're recognizing for them, they will come back with something like this, right? You guys believe in a flat earth, but it's hard to identify with that necessarily still, because when you search flat earth, this is the kind of stuff that comes up on Google these days, right?
Yeah.
And so a biblical cosmological model is what we would have shown on the last slide, whereas this is trying to fit a square piece of pancake floating land in a heliocentric model, which is just not at all what we believe. And the average person that will rebuttal and retort with something like this doesn't even question what is it that we believe. They assume that this is the case for how we picture it, whereas it's not at all.
Not at all. It's definitely not a piece of land that's flat with water on the sides, amongst other planetary bodies in a void of space. That's just the mockery that they make when people mention the idea of any model outside of the accepted heliocentric model. They think, oh, you must be a flat earther, or you must, just be a fool, is basically what they equate it to. And it's really sad that people fall for that indoctrination so easily. But unfortunately, Wes, it's taken me to this point in my life, 42 years, before I realized how easily people believe what quote unquote authority figures have told them. Like, it is truly one of mankind's greatest flaws, or possibly it has the potential to be their greatest strength, right? If they would just believe the authority figure of the creator.
It could be, yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? If they would just believe his words instead of
Right.
some dude that puts themselves through force or power or manipulation in authority over them, if they would just believe the creator, right? And his ultimate authority, then all of this would not be an issue. But
that's right. Yeah, we were designed to be led and to be shepherded, but the good shepherd is the one we were designed to be led by.
That's right. That's right. So we got some scriptures here.
Yeah, we just want to remind everybody, as we did say in Geocentricity, No Sphericity, episode 2 last year, we went over some of these scriptures, but just to cover them real quick, 1 Chronicles 16:30 affirms for us that, tremble before him all the earth. The world is firmly established and it cannot be moved. Psalm 93:1 says the Lord reigns. He is clothed with majesty. The Lord has clothed and girded himself with strength. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. What else does it say?
Psalm 96:10 says, say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. And then Psalm 104:5 says, he set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved.
And those are just a few of them, right? This is a consistent message here saying that the earth is not moving. It's immovable, and it's fixed, firmly established is one of those kind of description phrases that would be used to say that something steadfast, that it's not, it's not loosely established, it's firm, and it's set on pillars, foundations of the earth. And it's not one of these things shooting around a sun that's also shooting through a galaxy, that's also shooting through space, that's also expanding. None of that's happening.
It's funny, the average person doesn't realize the graphic that you put next to these verses, that is a model of how the sun, moon, and stars behave in the heliocentric model. They don't
Right.
realize that we're spinning around a sun that's shooting at ridiculous speeds through their model in a weird corkscrew fashion, which all these stars that we see throughout the year would change.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly,
Yeah.
that wasn't even propagated for me growing up in school. Do you
It wasn't.
remember a
Nope.
sun shooting through a galaxy? Right.
I
No, it
didn't
was
see that until college. Yeah.
right. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
something fairly recent that they kind of added to the model to try to help make sense of the precession of the equinoxes and the different things that they would tell you are illusions caused by the fact that the sun's shooting through space. And we would tell you that the North Star Polaris is situated directly above the North Pole and has been for all of recorded history, which would not be the case if this was going on with the sun shooting through space. None of that is happening.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But we have an incredible prophet in Enoch telling us, spitting some truth.
That's right. Yeah, Enoch 74, 7 through 9. And the days Uriel showed me, Uriel the angel whom the Lord of glory appointed over all the luminaries of heaven and the heavens, and in the world, that they might rule in the face of the sky, and appearing over the earth, become conductors of the days and nights, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the ministers of heaven, which make their circuit with all the chariots of heaven. A circuit, I believe we defined that word last time, but just to last season, but just to review, that's a word that means a completed circle oftentimes,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, and how interesting tonight we're talking about some of these luminaries that we see that go into retrograde, because even with them taking unusual turns, they do come back to their starting point, which is the definition of a circuit, right?
Yeah.
And it's not us that's spinning; it's actually them. So I think this is interesting that these things do follow a circuit. It's like Mario Kart, right? There's a starting line. You cross the starting line to finish again.
Exactly.
So.
You return to a starting point. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a perfect circle, but there's one other slide here that'll kind of clarify or help to add to those words. Would you read it?
Enoch 82, 8 through 9. And the Lord has power over night and day in the heaven to cause the light to give light to men, sun, moon, and stars, and all the powers of the heaven which revolve in their circular chariots.
Okay.
So, yeah, I like that this one actually complements the previous one where it mentioned that they're conductors, right? They're the conductors. What did you read here? And appearing over the earth become conductors of the days and nights, right? So that's something that kind of, I think Genesis 1 talked about them governing the day and the night, right?
Right.
Yeah,
they do. But yeah, this one clarifies by saying that they revolve, which is another word for moving around in a circuit or a circle, and it specifies here that it's a circular in their chariots that go around the heavens overhead.
That's right. And that's just some sort of mechanism for movement, just like we would say, you could just almost say in their, it's circuit, and there's they revolve and they're circular Ford Fusions.
Okay.
It's just a vehicle which they can move in their prescribed courses in this circuit.
Maybe they use that Tesla that Elon sent up.
Yes, that's what he was trying to do. He was like, "Oh yeah, let's send them another chariot for the red roadster chariot. That'd be great."
I doubt it. No, I don't even think that thing went up in any atmosphere.
Hey, that that was real because it looks so fake.
So fake.
It was.
Yes, sir. Revolving in circular chariots. So, yeah. And this is just exactly what we observe with our own eyes when we look up at the night sky or even the day sky, seeing the sun. They are revolving over around our heads, whereas we're sitting still. We look up and our own eyes tell us that these things are circling above. And we have all too often been led to believe otherwise, to not even be able to trust our own senses and what we observe with our own eyes here. But we want to tell you, you can trust the Father's word, and you can trust the senses that he created you and designed you with to tell you what's right. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause without us doing a full breakdown of the heliocentric model, if you just start learning how the Father describes his word and how he created things, the moment you hear a news article about the heliocentric model, or about some planned mission of a satellite that's out in space that's been out there for 70 years and still somehow has battery power. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it just, when you start hearing that stuff, you start to realize, man, this is like an elaborate story they've come up with and just reinforced with billions of dollars every year. You know, people ask, how do they billions of dollars, Wes? Like, what do they do with all that billions of dollars, right? Because they're not sending shuttle missions up there anymore. They're not launching satellites all the time. Like, what are they doing with their billions of dollars? And I'm sitting there going, guys, they're creating article after article after article on a daily basis. Space.com, astronomy.com, just pick a fake online e-zine that has a new article every day about there's theorized that gaseous planets out there. We don't know where, but it's out there somewhere. And it probably has rain. It's probably raining diamonds, and you're like, bro, where are you getting this stuff? And they're literally just making it up. There's no evidence for it. They're not following the scientific method, but they have to continually reinforce this model over and over. Even if you don't understand the article, as long as you hear the headline, that's part of the brainwashing.
Right. They got to feed that propaganda machine, as well as their adrenochrome farms. They probably got that going on too, where they launder the money and whatever they're doing with it. But some crazy stuff. Other than that, there's also something specific to this topic of where the stars are, is that, we read in Genesis, as well as Jubilees tells us that there are windows, or some translations may say portals, other translations might say gates, or floodgates. So there's those kinds of gates, which definitely implies a opening in a physical barrier of some sort, which is what we're telling you the dome of heaven is, the firmament, vaulted ceiling. So there's 12 portals. First Enoch 75:6, as for the 12 portals in the heaven at the ends of the earth, out of which go forth the sun, moon, and the stars. So 12, if you'll read all the chapters of First Enoch, like 73 through 78, mostly it'll go through the different movements of the luminaries, their ability to keep time, and their part in all of that. And he'll say that he was in the east and the south and the west, and in each part he saw 3 portals at the ends, the extremities of the earth, and even on the foundations of the heavens he's referring to, right? And which only makes sense on an enclosed model.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me as well, because if you mind if I go back to this big model real quick.
Sure.
So if we look at the big model and we understand how the ancients and the scriptures have described the encapsulation of the firmament levels as domes, and then that we can see that the domes themselves are sitting on something, right? Because even though that scripture you read where it says he puts his foundations in the waters, well, we all kind of understand that the waters are sitting on top of land. Can we agree about that?
Sure.
That it's not just water hovering, that the foundations of the dome were planted into, right? Just like on Earth, there isn't a floor to the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. There's one large landmass, and there's depressions within that landmass that water fills up, and we call them the oceans or lakes and ponds. So with that said, Wes, is it possible that the land extends beyond our encapsulated firmament, and the other firmaments are also sitting on land as well?
I believe so. When you say, like, are we thinking like the continent countries maybe floating around outside that is hidden land that we can't get to? I don't think so, because we're suggesting this would be outside of the enclosure, enclosing us.
Right.
And that's
yes, but see in this picture here where the sun and moon are in the third level of the firmament. So if they're coming through these 12 portals at the ends of the earth, well, then that makes me think, okay, well, then they're coming out of their portals that they're navigating the top above us. But they're not coming inside of our dome, in and out of our dome, right? Because it's not the ends of our earth, but it's, again, that word in Enoch, that word earth is generically translated in English to earth, but it just is a word that means land.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. But the third firmament is also sitting on land.
Yeah.
It's just not livable land for us.
No.
You know what I mean?
And we can't get outside of the first firmament.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And Jubilees 2 actually talks about the water separating outside of our first firmament, which makes sense with this graphic that we're seeing.
Yeah. We can only speculate how it looks and where the foundations lie and how the heavens are connected to them, but it's wonderful to think about.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So just in case anyone was asking, because there's like, well, wait a minute, I thought you guys said that the sun and moon is stored inside of our firmament, right? And it can be deceiving, right? If you don't understand the different layers of, because this graphic you have here is wonderful, but it's a top-down bird's eye view, right?
Yeah.
So they can get kind of confused with thinking, all right, well, wait a minute, do these portals, are they going inside the earth that we understand as the earth? But that is a generic word that means land. And the third firmament, in which encapsulates the second and the first firmament, as we showed you from the picture, where the sun and moon do their circular patterns, that is also sitting on land, So yeah, it's very interesting.
I almost wonder, like you see in this picture, how kind of close to the top there's like a spiral galaxy looking picture of stars, kind of. Can you see that? When amateur photographers do astrophotography, they can actually take pictures of things that kind of look like that. It's really fascinating, interesting, and that doesn't make me believe in a heliocentric cosmology, but it does make me wonder if those aren't the portals, maybe.
Yeah, I've had thoughts like that too, as far as like they call them, like nebula galaxies or spider galaxies or things like that. And I've thought, well, what if it's just the portals?
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting, because I definitely don't believe they're galaxies or wormholes or nothing like that.
No. Yeah, and in amateur astrophotography, independents are able to capture some really amazing things that, we'll look at some more things tonight that will kind of make you question some things you might have seen before. And let's check it out, though. What's next?
First Enoch 33.
Yeah, he's back here talking about the ends of the earth. I saw the ends of the earth whereon the heaven rests, the foundations of the heaven at the extremities of the earth, right? And the portals of the heaven open. And I saw how the stars of heaven come forth, and I counted the portals out of which they proceed. As we saw from the last side, there were 12 of those portals, but this is just reiterating this: the stars of heaven come forth from the portals that he saw, that Enoch sees, on where the heaven rests at the ends of the earth. Very cool.
Yeah, that would make perfect sense if the heaven is see-through, like it should be. That's how we see the stars, right?
Right.
Because we're looking through multiple levels of the firmament. And if he was escorted by the angel to the ends of the earth to see the portals of the heaven open, well, then that's interesting, because he can see the fifth layer or the third layer where the sun and moon and the stars are traveling through their different layers and the different portals. And it makes me wonder if that was a result of them being at just being there and being in a different atmosphere, basically.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Also consider that he's in the spirit, being shown things in a vision.
Yeah, vision. Yeah.
And accompanied by an angel who can show him however he wants to show him, I'm sure.
Yeah. Just like he has visions of going up to the Most High's throne, which normal man can't do as well. So yeah, good point.
Not in their physical bodies, right?
For sure, no.
Not yet, anyways. Go ahead with this one.
And then here in Enoch 36:3 says, through each of these small portals pass the stars of heaven and run their course to the west on the path which is shown to them.
Interesting. So isn't that how we see the stars as well as the sun move east to west, clockwise?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And
I think it's Enoch 77 that talk about in the west is where, I think that's where it says that this is where the stars set.
Right.
So
yeah, it was. Yeah, I remember him saying that there's even the stars that never set, and their portals.
Yeah,
yeah, that's cool.
It's very interesting.
It is. Enoch is a great read, big book, but I definitely recommend. And Sean even has a contextual study guide you guys can check out. Go over to his channel, check out the descriptions of his videos. You have a copy of it right there on hand?
Yeah, this is what we've been doing. You get a context color-coded study guide of the Book of Enoch, and we do have the light blue is all the color coding for the creation model verses. So once you get into the 70s, man, it's all light blue, right?
Yeah.
I just talk about, and I try to break it down in the commentary as far as what part of the creation he's talking about and why he's explaining it and that kind of stuff. So it's like we cover some of this information on Uncommon Ground, but some of the stuff we haven't gotten to yet, but
right.
We're gonna get to it. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, check out Kingdom in Context. He's actually going through that contextual study guide where he's breaking down some stuff in Enoch chapters by chapter. Great stuff over there, as well as I highly recommend getting you a copy of that contextual study guide. It's unlike anything else, whereas he breaks it down for you guys. Enjoy that. But also, what was next on the slides, if you would?
Yeah, we had the unique look through telescopes about these.
If I could, real quick, this is
Sure.
this is something that is produced. Many of you may have seen if you've been in the communities online and Facebook groups and different things where people are talking about the cosmology and different aspects of it. Of course, it's inevitable that we'll talk about the stars and planets as we're doing tonight. And a lot of guys go and pick up some cameras like the Nikon P900 or the Nikon P1000 that came out after that, or many other different cameras that are, high quality and able to get a good zoom on them. But not everybody is experienced in how to accurately focus these cameras, especially considering things that are so far away as in the heavens above. And these are the images that I got to say, I used to hold to the idea that this is exactly what the planets really look like. And it made sense considering there's the waters above. We're seeing these things through the waters possibly. But I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah, what
And
do you believe?
Well, I'd like to kind of show you. I can illustrate it better than I can explain it. But these things look to be, from everything I gather now, these look to be kind of out of focus, with the exception of maybe Jupiter, Saturn looks about right. It's just really bright. But yeah, these kind of put off an out of focus vibe to me now. Whereas if you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
And a lot of you have probably seen these of the stars too, and they're beautiful. It's really pretty. There's lots of different videos out there you can find of these twinklings that Sean, you mentioned earlier that we are seeing these things through waters above. As we know, water is above the first firmament and the stars shining through. We see these twinkling. The colors are magnificent. They're brilliant. And it's just like flashing, and you kind of see these ripples of these waves. But I would suggest that is possibly also an effect produced by an out of focus shot, that you can reproduce a liquefied looking, twinkle from a light that's down the road with the same camera if it's out of focus. And so this is beautiful, and I can only speculate. I can't say 100% that this is exactly what these things look like, or this is not at all what they look like. But if you go to the next slide, there's a verse that may lend some credence to the idea, because they do kind of look like a ball of fire almost too, like, just a raging ball of fire. But would you read this?
Here's Enoch 23, 1-5, and it says, "From there I went to another place, towards the west, unto the extremities of the earth, where I beheld a fire blaze and running along without cessation, which intermitted its course, neither by day nor by night, but but continued always the same. I inquired, saying, What is this, which never ceases? And then Raguel, one of the holy angels who were with me, he answered and he said, This is blazing fire, which you see running towards the west, is that of all the luminaries of heaven."
Okay. So maybe the fire blazing and running along without cessation, blazing fire is that of the luminaries of heaven. So this could be metaphoric language, kind of description language, where he's just saying it looks like a blazing fire. It could also mean that each one of these luminaries are points of fire somehow, as we know that the angels typically are made of fire, as well as water and spirit. So interesting stuff here to just kind of speculate on and wonder about. I can't say for sure. What are your thoughts on it?
I've heard the conversation you're mentioning. Actually, just as like a couple weeks ago, we have Bob Nodell was talking about this, and he said one of his friends that's a longtime astronomer has high-powered telescopes. He was claiming that he had heard the argument as well that a lot of this is out of focus, and he disagrees.
Really?
He claims that that is the best that he can get them in focus, is akin to some of these pictures. But regardless of if it's a blazing fire being seen through water, it's going to be almost impossible to focus on anyway, simply because it's part of that conversation they were having was that the optical limits, apparently this guy called Nikon, and he said, what is your optical limits of your zoom? And they said 147 kilometers. So what is it, like 122 miles or something like that in American standard? So if these things that we're trying to focus on are in the fifth layer of the firmament, I'm going to suggest they're further away above our heads than 122 miles.
A lot,
and therefore we wouldn't have the technical capability to pull them in focus anyway.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is,
So
and I appreciate that addition. That's well said.
yeah, so basically, like that's why they do look fuzzy and blurry, and we can't get a beat on if it's a fire or if it's an actual light bulb producing a light. It doesn't matter. I don't think we can actually put them in focus anyway.
That's all right. Well,
So
there's on the next slide, there's a picture that I wish I could tell you the source of it or what kind of camera the guy was using, but this is one I collected from years ago where the guy said that this was a picture of Sirius that he took, and I couldn't help but notice that it looked kind of like the moon. You know, the
okay,
point
yeah,
on the moon where there's like a circle towards the bottom of the moon, and the lines kind of converge
yeah,
toward it. And this has a similar vibe, of a very similar look to it almost. This is the star Sirius, allegedly, this photographer says. And so I hadn't seen it like that otherwise in other places. And I remember at the time when I saved this photo, I was like, it kind of looks more like the moon, as if maybe this could be more in focus. But again, this
Hmm.
is speculation. But I like to try to visualize these things and picture what they could really look like, as well
yeah.
as try to give you
Well,
guys an
if
idea.
you've when I was a kid, I was that dummy that would look directly into my flashlight and look at the bulb inside the flashlight. And sometimes I would walk up to car headlights when they were turned on, and I
Yeah.
would put my face right up to the car headlight and try to look inside the bulb when it was on. And of course, my parents were like, "You're gonna blind yourself," and I was like, "No, I'm okay. I'm strong." And so I would, so it reminds me of when I used to look directly into a light bulb, where you would see the illuminating glare, but then in the center you see the actual focal point of light being projected before it hits the interior glass of the bulb. But yeah, I think it's very interesting. I'm guessing this is the same star, just black and white
It
is
is,
on the
yeah,
right.
black and white in
Okay.
color. Yep.
Yeah, so the color, it looks happy, and the black and white, it's why so serious. So that's cool.
People in the chat are saying they look like eyeballs, but either way, they
Right.
are not millions of miles away.
Right. Yeah, and whatever these things are that put off the light, we're not seeing the angels through the firmament as well that are there conducting them and making sure that they stay in their course. As Enoch tells us, there are these heads of angels and get all their names listed off. So they clearly are emanating or able to be not seen from the same light source that we can see these.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right? Just like if an angel was interacting on the earth, you wouldn't be able to see it too, right? So
Right.
it's like these stars we're looking at are putting off light within the visible light spectrum that the human eye can see.
True.
Which is interesting because it's all that same light spectrum is bound up in sunlight, so it's very interesting.
Exactly. I
Yeah,
agree.
there's definitely some mysteries. Even with all the descriptions Enoch gives us, it doesn't tell you everything.
It doesn't, no. And yeah, this is one of those topics when it comes to, and I feel like we had to address it eventually because there's so much heliocentrism confusion tied into these things that people, needed this topic covered. But it's still, there are, like you say, a lot of things are mysteries about it, even to me and to us as well. So yeah, as I showed above, there's, the ones that I feel like may be out of focus, whereas some amateur astronomers, astrophotographers. Now, a couple of these images, they'll tell you that they're stacked, where they'll take like 100 pictures of the same, luminary, and then they'll take the best ones, the most clear, in focus ones of those, and they'll stack them to give you a little more quality to the image.
Okay.
But that can also produce an effect that makes it look a little more unrealistic than it might actually look, I would imagine. However, that being said, there are occasions when you're taking photos of amateurs take photos of these luminaries. For instance, if you look at the one on the bottom, the farthest to the left, that is allegedly Venus. And I can attest that I've taken photos with a P900 where I've looked at one of these luminaries and it did very much look like it was going through a phase like the moon does. Just like you're seeing in this amateur photo of Venus on the far left, as well as Mercury kind of has the same depiction in the second one to it. Next to it here, Mercury they go through phases that are similar to what the moon looks like based on its phase that it's going through. So that kind of gives the appearance of something that looks more like the moon than just one of the fuzzy fire stars that you would see in other videos or pictures. What do you think?
I've never had a chance to look through a high-powered telescope to see.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That's all right. Yeah. So these are interesting because Yeah, if you go to the next slide, let's see what in there a scripture verse. Yeah, so Enoch 77:3. These are the two great luminaries, speaking of the sun and the moon, whose orbs are as the orbs of heaven, and the dimensions of both are equal. We covered those things when we were talking about the sun and moon last season. But it reminds me of how when we look up at the moon, it does very much look like a spherical object. It's got shadows in places. It's got just a look about it that feels spherical. However, we know that we only ever see one side of it. It never rotates. It never spins around and shows us its backside. And it looks orb-like. And just to remind everybody, the definition of orb is a spherical body or a globe, also encircle or enclose. And I find it interesting that it says whose orbs are as, which it means are like the orbs of heaven. So if heaven is a half circle dome, makes me wonder if this verse isn't saying that so are these luminaries. Makes me wonder, at least. But
say that again. I must have
well,
missed
it
something.
says who these are two great luminaries whose orbs are as the orbs of heaven. So if we know if heaven is a half circle dome, then maybe these orbs also are, since we only ever see one side of them. That could be the case.
Or is it referring to the stars? The orbs of heaven being the stars and not the actual structure of the heaven?
I see. Yeah, that's a possibility too. Yeah, I got you. I see what you mean. Gotcha. Yeah. So either way, I wouldn't.
But I've seen that argument where people have taken a bowl turned upside down and they painted the interior of the bowl to look like the moon.
Yeah.
And then and if you keep the center focal point on the eye of the observer as it moves around, it would have the same effect as the moon.
For sure. Yeah, I'm not positive how I feel about that, but I just know that we look at the moon and it does very much look spherical. That's why we get that argument all the time of, so everything in the heavens, everything in the sky and in space are spherical, but Earth isn't. And I would say it's a false equivocation, but we'll look at some things on that in a minute. However, right. Enoch 18:6 does also say, I saw the winds which turn the sky, which caused the orb of the sun and of all the stars. So as you said, the orbs of heaven could also just be referring to the stars. Here's this verse is saying the orbs of the stars to set, and over the earth I saw the winds which support the clouds. So if it's saying the stars are orbs, based on the definition of that word that R.H. Charles used to translate, orb could very much mean a spherical object.
It could, yeah. Now, again, the whole setting of what we've been describing for 26 previous episodes is that the descriptions of where we live and how we're enclosed and the topography of the land and all that stuff does not lend to the heliocentric model. So even if the sun was an orb in the sky that illuminated heating fire, as described in Enoch, and the moon as well, that doesn't mean that the land you live on is an orb. That's just silly. It's like, the late Rob Skiba used to always say, just if you're in a basketball court, you don't look up the lights and think suddenly the basketball court is the shape of the lights. No,
right. And there's some other examples of metaphors for that too in the coming slides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but before we got to that, if there's a clip maybe that would help show something that I found interesting too to consider, is that you can see with your own optics that you might have. I'm pretty sure I've even been able to zoom in with the latest, greatest smartphone camera that I've had. I've been able to zoom in and visibly see what they call moons around Jupiter. But any amateur photographer and any videographer is able to zoom in with a high-powered zoom and see these things also. And this is another clip, Sean, that doesn't have any audio. You can play it while we talk. The moons of Jupiter. Galilean image taken with a 600 millimeter, I believe it said reflective camera. So you got Jupiter, Callisto, Ganymede, Europa, and is that Io or Lo? I forget. But over a time lapse over a period of 21 days, I slowed this part down a little bit so you guys could see that they do kind of circle.
Yeah.
Or maybe at least go back and forth. There's at least 4 or 5 here that are visible now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, science.com and different space.com and stuff will say that they have found allegedly 72 moons around Jupiter. I don't know that we can see that many, but
that's a lot.
there's 4 luminaries that seem to be circling or traversing across, around, back and forth next to what we know the luminary that known as Jupiter. And I think that's interesting because I'm not going to deny what can be observed and verified.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm also not going to say, well, that has to mean that these are spheres, solid worlds shooting around the sun. I don't think that has to mean that either. Thank you for showing that.
No, it's definitely not. To me, none of this. Again, that's if you start with the assumption or the presupposition that you live in a ball in space. Obviously, if you just continue to start with the creator's descriptions of where you live, then suddenly our deductive and inquisitive nature to figure out or to try to understand what we are observing is that much closer to the truth. If we don't start with the false model, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't have all of, like we've talked about before, we don't have all this figured out.
No,
but we definitely, because the scriptures does not tell you every single thing about the creation. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, like you remember in the book of First Kings where it talks about Solomon was explaining, I think it was to Queen Sheba, you know, explaining the nature of the animal, the insects and the plants and things like that. And he's basically impressing her. He's putting strong game on Queen Sheba, and he's just completely nerding out on her and explaining the ways of nature and how things move. And I'm sitting there going, that's really cool, but where did he learn that? Because that's not in the scriptures.
Huh.
You know what I mean? It's just a short reference to his amazing knowledge about nature in certain ways that is not actually explained to us in great depth in the scriptures, right? I know Proverbs talks about the ant and how it stores and things like that, and it's to be considered and stuff like that. But you know, from the short summary of King Solomon impressing Queen Sheba, it makes you think that he's explained a lot more than just a passing reference of a scripture, right? So it makes you wonder, okay, where did he learn all that? And this is where WesBlaze and I have talked about this in the past, that the scriptures that we have today are left to us through antiquity. They tell us the complete story with a ton of detail. But the more I study how we got our Bible, the more I start to realize that the people of ancient times, I think they had more information on hand than we do.
I do too. Yeah. I'm always wondering, man, what scriptures did those guys have available to them at that point in time? But at the same time, I also praise the Father that he's preserved what he has through all these centuries of rulers and you know, governments that were against him, people who burned his scriptures in masses. And you know, I'm just thankful that he's preserved what he has. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 52 countries made the Bible illegal in the modern day. So like they're killing people in China for believing the Bible and possessing one. And so yeah, like the Father, in spite of that, it's still the #1 best-selling book in the world. It's still, we have the wonderful complete details that we need about our Messiah who came, accomplished his role, is now our high priest in heaven, making atonement for us and offering salvation to all who would call on him. So yeah, this is where I feel like we have the information we need for the time that we're in, for sure.
Yeah.
But just going off of the info that is talked about in the scriptures we have, we can see and easily deduce people from the past had a ton more scriptures.
They did.
And this is where I think it's fascinating. Like I've mentioned this a few times previously, since we're mentioning Enoch tonight. There is something that was found with the Dead Scrolls called the Genesis Apocryphon. And in this short little, just a short little paragraph that they found. And in that little paragraph, it talks about in Genesis chapter 20, when Abraham was in Egypt and he lied to Pharaoh at that time and said that Sarah was his sister. Well, technically, you know, it was his half sister. And so there's a technicality there. The point is, Pharaoh was under the impression that Sarah was available. He took her to wed, and the Father spared Pharaoh from actually touching her. And then after this event, according to the Genesis Apocryphon found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, it tells us that Abraham sat down with Pharaoh and taught him wisdom from the book of Enoch.
Right.
So I'm sitting there going, and of course, if you understand the history of the book of Enoch, it's not the complete book of Enoch that Abraham had. We have 6 different fragmented scrolls that have been put together that we call the book of Enoch, first Enoch anyway. So did Abraham have the fullness of the book of Enoch? Because that's amazing, right? That would make sense, how he could go through and teach him all this wisdom by reviewing that with Pharaoh at that time. And I just think that, wow, yeah, without belaboring that too much, like we're doing our best to piece together what we can with all the info we have. And what's crazy, Wes, is the info that we have is still too much for the modern believer to take in. They still get, there's so much indoctrination and lies against what we have left. The enemy is so afraid of what we actually do have left that he tries to indoctrinate us since birth to not believe it. So it's still powerful.
I know it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I enjoy some of those Genesis Apocryphon scrolls, like the Testament of Enos, the Testament of Kohath, right? There's quite a few guys that you don't hear mentioned a whole lot beyond their few mentions in the canon that we have available to us today, that have whole fragmented available to us today, writings that were in those Dead Sea Scrolls too. So interesting stuff. Yeah. And Enoch even itself said that this is written to a distant generation in the tribulation of the end times, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So things are coming to light.
They really are. Yeah. I always try to remind people that we're reviewing Enoch as part of our scriptures tonight to help you understand some of the details of what's described to us as far as the luminaries in the sky and the wandering stars. But, Enoch prophesied in his book, I think it's chapter 108, that his words would be written down in many languages and read to people and become a source of joy to people. Like, that's before the Tower of Babel, whenever the whole world still spoke one language. Yeah. He's making this prophecy. Like, that's crazy.
I know it.
That's crazy. We're living in that time. Like, we're literally doing the fulfillment of that prophecy as we read his scriptures on screen to you in the English language tonight.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
It is.
So anyway.
Very much so. What's next on the agenda, my friend?
So were you, was this all you had to say about the different moons?
Yeah, that there's visible things that where we're told these are called moons, but these are visible luminaries that do exist with Jupiter and appear to traverse or circle it, maybe orbit it in a way. But yeah, it's part of the Father's creation here.
Yeah,
but it does not lend to this idea. But that's just to skim through. And to me, it doesn't prove that this model is true at all.
No.
Tycho Brahe, or how would you say his last name? How do you pronounce that?
Brahe? I've heard people say Brahe, but whatever,
Would you
just call him Tycho, bro? He says, "Now it is quite clear to me that there are no solid spheres in the heavens, and those that have been devised by authors to save the appearances exist only in their imagination. For the purpose of permitting the mind to conceive the motion which the heavenly bodies trace in their courses."
All right. So much like let's see, when we covered the moon, the lesser light episode, we reviewed a clip from a scientist in the 50s and 60s who said that he believed the moon was plasma, right? And we talked about how it's a light. And so here's Tycho, big TB, in the 1500s, 1600s, talking about how he didn't believe there are solid spheres in the heavens. So even if Enoch does say these are orbs, and even if that word was correctly translated to mean that they're the luminaries are globe spheres above, then that doesn't necessitate that they're solid. And I think what this lends to is the idea that nobody can land on these things.
Well, yeah, for sure. And if what we read from First Enoch is correct, and they are made of fire, well, then that means they're not solid.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff here. Yeah, even him, and he was a contemporary of, let's see, he lived right after Copernicus, Tycho did, and he lived right before Isaac Newton. So he was a contemporary of Kepler, and he was in disagreement with the heliocentric model the entire time. And so he said things like this that were in disagreement with what the other guys were saying about these luminaries in the heavens.
Yeah, it makes me just like that would be a fascinating short story to write. You had a hot tub time machine, you go back and talk to this dude and read First Enoch to him.
Yeah.
And something tells me he would get into that hot tub with his big plumy hat, just get all drenched and be like, "Tell me more about this wisdom."
Yeah.
And you're like, bro, put on some swim trunks. Anyway.
So yeah, this was because like what you were saying earlier about what Rob Skiva said with the, just because the basketball is a sphere does not mean that the court is. What were you going to say?
No, exactly. You said it right. Just we never look at a pool table and say, why isn't that a spherical pool table? Right? Because we understand how it works, right? We can measure that the table is flat and that the balls are following a course because that's how we're designed. It's all an assumption. It's an assumption, guys, when they tell us that the lights you see in the sky that they call the planets, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, right? That those are spherical and solid objects that could be landed on, explored, mined possibly, or whatever. That's all told to you, and there's no proof to show that to you. There's no proof that no one's pulled back any Venus dust. No one has pulled back any Mars dust. I literally, you guys should, if you've never heard this before, please look into, the idea of the pictures that matched on Devon Island with Greenland and currently the Mars rover and all that. I mean, maybe that's a whole nother show we do in the future.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's no actual evidence for the stories we were told as children about balls in space and solid planets and people getting in spaceships and landing on these surfaces. There's no evidence for that, guys. It's just a fancy fairy tale that's been told to us our whole life until we believe it.
Exactly. Yeah, when I started to tease this episode, before I was done putting the presentation together, I had the thought that we would be able to cover things like the Mars landings of the rovers and the different things that they've done in scientific exploration of what they call the surface of Mars. But by the time we're going to get through this presentation, I realize that this is that's a whole nother show in itself. So I look forward to doing that, and this will help set up the foundation for that future episode as well, because there's a lot to it. They do a lot of fraudulent deception.
It is. And Rich P in the audience is talking about how they got caught because the mushrooms were in that one picture. And they said, so people were like, wait a minute, there's mushrooms on Mars? And they didn't realize that it was just actually a picture from Greenland.
Yeah. But this is a perfect example of what we see all too often from the defenders of the globe logic, right? The heliocentric globe model belief. They'll say, which way do we look? Come on, class, everybody tell me, which way do we look to prove the shape of the surface beneath our feet, right? And they don't do that with the clouds. They don't do that with they don't say that Earth must be a soft, fluffy marshmallow because look, there's a cloud. That's what that looks like. They don't they don't say, anything else like that, but they do that they've been taught to rely on that assumption that what we see in the sky must be a perfect representation of the ground beneath our feet. And you get into these, you'll start talking about the curvature and the things that we're able to see way too far, like we talked about in episode 5 of last season of Where is the Curve. You start talking about those things, and when we go back to the other person who's defending the globe model, they'll all too often turn to the planets and the sun, the moon, and they'll say that's how we know that the shape of the ground beneath us is spherical. And that's it's kind of a fallacy, I would say.
Absolutely. Now do the inverse and say you wanted to figure out the shape of the sun. All right. So, and I told you, okay, you don't know the shape of the sun. It could be a flat plate, but it could be a round orb. You're trying to figure it out. Okay. So let's go dig in the dirt 6 feet down, and we're going to surmise some things from the dirt and try to figure out the shape of the sun.
Nobody
we'll never look at it. We'll never study it. We know it's we know it's just behind us shining down on us as we dig in the dirt, but we're never going to look at it, and we're going to try to guess what the shape of the sun is. That's literally the logic that they tell you when they say, well, all the planets and the sun and moon are round, so why isn't the earth round? You're like, bro, that's not how you think. Like that you're the thinker is not being used in the right way. Like we don't look at the sky to determine the shape of what we're standing on. So it's just utter nonsense. It's almost to the point of absolute mockery.
Yeah.
Like that's how nonsensical it is. It's like they're trolling you in order to belittle you and make fun of you.
And then people regurgitate that and repeat the same lines. Like, look way out there in the sky, look everywhere, but where you're standing now. See how round the earth is? See how globular it is? That's what happens. Yeah. And so you just got to realize that your eyes can deceive you, and what you're taught to assume as the underlying foundation of assumption will lead you into a misleading direction all too often. Because if I were to tell you that these right here, these images are, the latest exoplanets produced from images of NASA satellites that have been in recent exploration, the average person would say, yeah, that's what we're looking at here.
This is amazing, man. So you're saying we've got satellite images that reach deep into the space, right? Hundreds of thousands of miles into space, if not.
I'm not, though. No, that's just what they would have us believe.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying they would have us believe that, they can take photographs like this and call these planets and act like these are other worlds that you can land on and that could sustain life or something like that. But if you'll go to the next slide, just want to let everybody know these are the bottoms of frying pans. Didn't line up the slide very well, but yeah,
it's all right.
Those are not photographs of anything otherworldly or from the heavens. This is the rusty bottom of an old frying pan.
Yep.
And it's that easy. They could literally just be doing things like that and say, here's a planet.
It's that simple to see people. Like, it's just called Photoshop, and it's been a powerful tool for entertainment industry as well as for the governments to show people that's not real in order to push a narrative.
No, right? Whereas with, things like what they used to call a planet, now they've downgraded it to a dwarf planet, Pluto. I know it says best of today, but these were from 1994 and then 2002, 3, and then another one of a Coolpix 900, where Pluto just kind of looks like a point of light is the best they can get it from an amateur standpoint of an independent photographer trying to take images of this luminary. This is kind of the best they can do, right?
It's interesting. And didn't this come through with essentially it's the pixelation because the digital camera, it's recreated through ones and zeros, right?
Yeah, and and they have to zoom in to get it to kind of look big enough like they're doing, and when they do, based on the quality of the camera available to them at that time, it's real pixelated, because it's such a small point of light, so distant.
Yeah.
But then when people like organizations like NASA produce an image, if you would, on the next slide, they produce images for us of the same luminary. They say, allegedly, they give us an image of what they call Pluto here. And ironically, it's got the face of a character named Pluto right there on the side of it. Now we can't verify this, but this is the images that NASA gives us. And
pretty sad.
Just, it's no wonder, since we have seen from history that Warner von Braun and Walt Disney worked together. They had a propaganda machine going back then in the 60s to get people ready for the moon landing deception. And Disney and NASA have been hand in hand ever since. You can see examples in the media of when they've worked together, and they'll advertise each other. And there's just one of many examples how they kind of have rubbed it in our face, I feel like. And then when you look at another image, they somehow added color, even though the last image was kind of colored. They found that there's red and blues on the surface of Pluto now instead of the colors they decided on before. But when you really start to examine these images, like I say, I'm here to tell you they completely fabricate this image of Pluto on the right, whereas this is an actual photo that you could take yourself of the moon on the left. But if you click one more slide, I've taken the liberty of circling some of the places and making note of some of the places where it's almost as if they've copied and pasted the same patterns of craters, or so-called craters, to produce the image of what they're calling the planet Pluto on the right. Because in the same exact formations of placing, they have these so-called holes, right? The so-called craters in the image in the same places.
Yeah, it's pretty telling. Like, it's almost as if they took an image of the moon, changed the contrast a little bit to accentuate the quote unquote craters, and then added color and just started messing with it in Photoshop. So
exactly,
it's pretty bad. It's pretty obvious too. They even put Pluto's eye in there. Can you see Pluto's eye in there?
Yeah,
right there.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, a lot of similarities. And I thought, I wasn't sure at first about looking at that. Somebody else pointed out some of those consistencies in the photoshopping and the copy paste, but the longer I looked at it, the more it was just evident that the more things started popping out that aren't even circled that are very similar with the two images. But these are just a couple things you can skim through. The Pluto being demoted was no longer a planet. They introduced it in 1930 and then demoted it in 2006.
It's messed up, man.
They don't say it's a planet anymore. But here's another one where this is supposedly Venus on the right side here, and if you'll click one more time, it's the same stuff going on. Some of the same crater placings and parts of the image that just appear to have been copied and pasted in order to create this representation of what they call Venus. I don't believe it.
Yeah, this is pretty obvious too, especially towards the bottom. You can almost see the masking layer of the orangish fire that they layered over it. And you can see at the bottom where it masks off in a straight line, Like this one's really, really obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. So yeah, they're constantly producing images to help feed their narrative that are just fakes and forgeries.
Yeah.
But when we're here to tell you that planets as they're modernly taught are not in Scripture, a lot of times people will point to this verse.
Okay.
That the King James specifically, it's the King James version that is known for having this word in there. And I'll read that it says, "And he put down the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places round about Jerusalem. Them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the hosts of heaven." So that's idolatry, right?
Right.
But this word here, planets, was used. If you'll go to the next slide, what was that? How it's translated in other places, or what did the Hebrew actually say? And so, when you look into it in the Strong's Concordance, go ahead.
I was just saying, it looks like it's the Mazzaroth,
Right?
The constellations, and as opposed to the planets.
Perhaps signs of the zodiac, right? The
Right.
constellations specifically on the ecliptic line. So, yeah, that's what that word is supposed to be.
Yeah, because that is more consistent with other scriptures we have about them worshiping the hosts of the heaven, which we know is considered the stars and not specifically a planet, or what they've told us is a planet. Yeah.
Which coincidentally is a little ironic, considering that we're telling you that the wandering stars, what were known as planets, are just a different class of the luminaries known as stars in Scripture.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting passage a lot of people will point to when they're talking about this topic and this concept. Would you read it?
In Jude 1:11-13, it says, "Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit, and perished in the rebellion of Korah. These are spots in your love feasts, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. They are clouds without water, carried about by the winds, late autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever."
There you go. So while the book of Jude does speak to the effect of, like in verse 6, "and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he is kept in the eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of that great day." So if you guys remember last season, episode 2021, we talked about Tartarus, angels in chains. And we do see in Jude earlier on, referring to those angels who sinned, did not keep their own domain, but now are chained up in darkness in a place under the earth. But here later in Jude, it's a different context, right? If you click one more slide over, when he's referring to wandering stars here, the context, I would point out, is for certain men have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation, ungodly men who turn the grace of our God into lewdness, right? Lascivious grace, and deny the only Lord and God and our Lord Jesus Christ, Yeshua of Nazareth. Jude 1:14, after that passage we just read a moment ago, goes on to say, "Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints." So what I wanted to point out here is that when, in the context of wandering stars, would you go back one? When it's used as that phrase, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever, the context of this passage is speaking about men, right? The feasts, the spots in your love feast, who feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. It's talking about guys, like people. But
they crept in to spy on, crept in, like it said long ago, marked out for this condemnation. See, these are rebellious men.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it uses this phrase in the Greek that's asteris planetae. And so coincidentally, that is the same, like the word, if we'll go one more or two more slides over, coincidentally, the same word where we get for the word that we use today, planet. It's the etymology has the asteris planetae is the same word that it became the word planet of today. So late Old English, planetae in old astronomy, a star other than a fixed star, a star revolving in an orbit, from Old French planete, modern French, and directly from late Latin planeta, from Greek planetus, from asteris planetae. There it is, wandering stars. To wander, a word of uncertain etymology, but so called because they have apparent motion, unlike the fixed stars, originally including also the moon and sun, but not the earth. So that goes back to one of the opening slides, that the Greek cosmology and a lot of the ancient cultures, they believed in 7 luminaries or great luminaries or whatever the case, apart from the fixed stars. And they did not include the earth in that because they didn't believe in heliocentrism, but they did include the sun, the moon, and all of the so-called planets except Uranus and Venus. Or I'm sorry, Uranus and Neptune. They did not include those. But yeah, this is coincidentally the same word, and as Jude used here to describe those men who have wandered from the truth, right? Wandered from God and his path.
Yep. So is this saying that those men are the planetes in the sky that we see, or is it just Jude is using a metaphor about the behavior of these men in regard to something that's considered a wandering star?
I would hold to the latter, and I think the further definitions on the next slide would help define that for us as well. Because if we look at the Strong's Concordance, that word planetes that was used there in as in Jude 1 was a wanderer, is what that means. And even in the Exhaustive Concordance over here, it says from planos, a rover like a planet, or figuratively, an erratic teacher wandering. Interesting. It says, see Greek planos. Would you read this, or the latter part of it?
The cognate 4107, the planetes, properly a wandering star, a false teacher operating without moral compass and exploiting other aimless people, prompting them to also stray from God's circle of safety, which is also sound doctrine.
Aha. So the word that we used, the word that became the word planet, that is used by modern scientism to refer to those luminaries that they have deemed in a part of a heliocentric cosmology, that word is derived from a word that means prompting to stray from God's circle of safety. Fascinating, isn't it? Because that's exactly the deception that's going on. They're straying from sound doctrine. Go ahead.
It actually, strangely enough, it reminds me of Cain.
Yeah.
You remember when the Father said, you'll be a wanderer upon the earth?
That's right.
But then in the next few verses, it says he went and built a city, named it after his son Enoch. Different Enoch than the prophet we've been reading about, but it just makes me wonder that if it was more in line with this particular definition of that term, that he's not, since he left Adam and Eve, who had sound doctrine, that now he's a wanderer upon the earth, and doesn't mean that he's just wandering aimlessly like a vagabond, but that he is a false teacher. He was someone that's not teaching the ways of God, and which is why people have always asked me, they're like, Sean, how could Cain be called a wanderer upon the earth? But then it says he went and built a city, and that to build a city takes, you're not wandering, you're in a station, you're in a local area for a consistent amount of time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Not a nomad.
So like, yeah, you're not a nomadic, and just you're not like Genghis Khan just roving around the earth and attacking people. So it'd be a lot more in line with this definition of the term. In my understanding.
Agreed. Yeah. And also, from Genesis to Revelation, we know that the Father is consistent in the language that he inspires, because the beast, the word is found in Revelation 13, this planetes, or the last word that we were looking at, and when it says, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he created to do in the sight of the beast. The second beast, right, deceives. That word deceives was planetes.
Yeah.
So it's the same.
It's good.
Wandering. But did we do this one already? Yeah.
That's good.
One more over. Yeah, planos, a deceiver. It's this is the root word for planetes, right? Leading astray, misleading, deceiving, wandering, a deceiver or imposter.
Oh, so wait a minute. So a deceiver, if this word planos is the root word for planetes and it means deceiver, how interesting is it that people have used the word planet and said that they're solid objects in a system that God didn't describe to deceive us into not believing what God described?
Right.
That seems pretty ironic how that happens.
It is. It's almost like he just ingrains and encodes, signs and little hints, breadcrumbs here and there for us to realize what's going on. I
That's
like it.
pretty amazing. Wow.
Mhm.
Okay.
A
So just
deceiver.
like when we talked about NASA last year, how the word NASA, it can mean nasha in the Hebrew to deceive, but also in Sanskrit, NASA means destruction. And they're literally causing the destruction of people's faith by teaching them a cosmology, including planets, that leads them away from God's truth and
Right.
the path that He has for them. So it's very interesting, these word choices by these institutions.
Agreed. Very much so.
That's wild.
Yes, sir. So that brings us to one of the many instructions that the Father has laid out in what is called the Hebrew word Torah. Many people would translate it in English as laws, commandments, right? God's basic instructions for behavior, for living that He hands down and passes through, preserves to us by His prophets and His inspired word to say, this is right behavior. This is how to live like me and my son, how to disciple after our son. He gives us good instructions, right? When
That's
you say,
right.
Sean,
100%.
what would He have said here in Deuteronomy 4:19, if you would?
He tells them, Israel, to beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and moon and stars, all the host of the heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven.
So don't lift your eyes to the heaven, see the sun, moon, stars, and the host of heaven, and be drawn away to worship them or serve them.
Yeah. Because they've been given as signs and seasons. They're not actual gods to be worshipped, but this is the story of the ancient cultures, right? They would pick out someone like Venus, right? That was a god of the ancient Romans and Greeks. Mercury, right? It was one of the names for what was Anubis,
Hermes.
So like, and these were commonplace as adopted, if I could put it like that, adopted into the pantheon of gods. These same names for these deceiving lights that have been told you are gods to be worshipped in the past, and in the modern narrative today, they're actual places that we could possibly go see, built upon a system that doesn't exist in order to lead you away from God's truth.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly what they're doing. And so, how interesting is it that from the beginning, the Father foresaw that humankind and the wicked rulers would cause people to stray from Him like this, and He would say, "Don't do this," ahead of time.
Yeah. Ahead of time. That's right. And I believe Jupiter, that was the name for Zeus, for Ra,
Yeah.
for Satan, right? And that's
Yeah.
literally one of the stars up there. It's supposedly the biggest one,
Yeah.
How funny is it they call it the gas giant? Because Satan's full of hot air anyway. So
right. And
yeah,
and don't let them gaslight you, because when somebody gaslights you, they cause you to question your reality, right? And they'll tell you that
right.
these are giant gas balls, whereas they're surrounded by a vacuum of space with no barrier, and a ball of gas could not exist without some sort of barrier to keep it enclosed, right? That's why we have, when gas is pressurized and contained, it's in some sort of container.
That's right.
But
That's funny.
if it weren't, it would just dissipate. However, Deuteronomy 17:2-5 gives us a little more information on the judgment and the justice that is carried out. He says, if there is found in your midst in any of your towns, which the Lord your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God by transgressing His covenant, right? Sin, transgression of His law, and has gone and served other gods and worshiped them, or the sun or the moon, or any of the heavenly hosts, which I have not commanded. And if it is told you and you have heard of it, then you shall inquire thoroughly. Behold, if it is true and the thing certain that this detestable thing has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out that man or that woman who has done this evil deed to your gates, that is, the man or the woman, and you shall stone them to death. So a few things about this. It seems serious enough that if they're worshiping these hosts of heaven, worshiping the sun, moon, stars, any of the luminaries above that God has not commanded to do, it's serious enough that the judges at the temple and the priests would have this person put to death with the death penalty, capital punishment, right? And this is what the Father instructed of them. This wasn't just willy-nilly, arbitrarily people saying, oh, I think this is what's going down. Let's get all the town together with our pitchforks and our torches and throw some stones at this person because we have this accusation against them. He's speaking to the priests and the judges of Israel, which were appointed and ordained and working at the temple with a institution of judgment and justice that was set up by the Father to accurately perform this justice and carry it out. So that it says, right, you shall inquire thoroughly. It doesn't just say ask about it and find out if this is what the people say. It's like perform an investigation is what he's telling his people to do here. And if it's true, then yeah, they would be stoned to death. So is this something that we do today, though, Sean? Do we just, as Christians and Bible believers, should we just willy-nilly stone people?
Today, we're not under that governmental system today. We're under dispersion as prophesied, and we're cast out to different nations that have different forms of government. This is all prophesied in the scriptures, and we're going to be like that until the Messiah returns. And so we abide by the laws of the government of the nation that we're under, just like ancient Israel, when they were dispersed into Babylon, they had to abide by the rules of Babylon because they were in dispersion. Yahweh told them to be respectful to their king, to pray for the welfare of that country, and to abide by those national laws. They couldn't have the Levites in power enacting their own form of Torah in ancient Babylon, just like today. This system that they had set up for Levites who would judge a matter and then determine if the capital punishment was appropriate. Now we live under a system where we have a judge, a bailiff, and a courthouse, and a county sheriff, and the lockup procedures, and then they determine if you're going to get a death penalty. And so, but it is something that I thought was interesting about this particular image, is that my wife and I were listening to some stuff like a year ago, and it was talking about the stoning process and how the way they would, some cultures still do stoning around the world today, and they bury them in the dirt up to their neck. So just their head sticking up. And then the people standing around them, they all throw their rocks at the same time. And so it's like a big pile of rocks that come down on the person's head, and kills them instantly. Mm-hmm. So it's this particular picture is interesting, but I don't think I've ever seen a supposed accurate depiction of a stoning as it's still performed in some countries today, to where it's instant death. It's not like you're just getting pelted with rocks for 30 minutes. It's like instant death.
Pebbles and
Yeah. And the people don't have to throw violently at you as if they have malice or hatred towards you. It's literally just everyone tosses in their rock, and the sheer immense weight of all of it coming at you at the same time, it kills you instantly. Whether it knocks you out or cracks your head or breaks your neck, it doesn't matter. It just kills you instantly.
Right. It wasn't meant to be torturous and belabored.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunately a lot of believers who don't understand some of these details about how the law of God was performed and about how the priesthood worked, and they would judge a matter, and it's not just that moment. You remember that moment in the Gospels where they bring the adulterous woman before Yeshua, and then the Pharisees say to Yeshua, like, "Oh,
what say you?
Should we stone her?" Right? And then Yeshua's like, he who's without sin cast the first stone. A lot of people don't understand the process, and they think that Yeshua was just supposed to, or if the woman was guilty, that someone would have just picked up rocks right there to stone her. We even see that happening with Stephen later, and then we see another moment in Scripture where the people were picking up rocks to stone Yeshua because they thought he was being blasphemous.
Yeah.
But that was not the way it's described in the Scriptures. So those people were not abiding by God's instructions for this capital punishment. They were abusing that system, which is why Yeshua was calling out those Pharisees for abusing that system, and not doing it just righteously, right? So I think it's interesting as far as the type of capital punishment that we see in the Scriptures for this command, right? And when people decide that they have are out there worshiping false gods, we're not in that system today as far as having a Levite and authority over us, because the Father has told us throughout Scripture that those Levites would be dispersed, as well as the regular people who used to be under the authority of the Levites. Covenant Israel, both authority and people, would all be dispersed amongst the nations, so that we're not in that same system now. And therefore
the temple would no longer be standing.
And the temple's been undone and completely broken down brick by brick, and it's not going to be put back up until the New Jerusalem arrives. And so there's a whole bunch of things, that context that goes into this whole conversation. While we don't just willy-nilly pick up stones, we're not the judges, right? We're not the average Christian who's a believer in Christ is under Christ's discipleship. Christ is the judge that executes people when he returns,
and he will.
And this is where he's the one making that call. he's not here. We don't make that call. Right now, we pray for people. We love them. We try to share the truth with them. And we let Yeshua sort them out when he returns.
That's right. Yeah. And it's good to keep in mind that, like you were saying, we don't have this system of judgment going on right now, even though we are under governments that will have the capital punishment for things like murder at times. They'll execute people. It's based on the original instructions of the Father that he had in his government, and they just abuse that in many ways, right? But I'm reminded of, in Revelation, we have Revelation 21. No, I'm sorry. Let's do 22:15. Yeah, outside of the kingdom are dogs and sorcerers, immoral persons, and the murderers and idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices lying. You know, in Revelation 21:8, the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, and immoral persons, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, there will have their part in the lake of fire, which is the second death. So it seems that there is still a death penalty, a second death penalty, even for people that engage in the practice of these certain behaviors, and idolatry is one of them. So I wanted to look at this next slide to help give some context of why it was so serious, because it didn't just involve the idea of them looking up at these luminaries. Let's say they worship Jupiter or Zeus back then, and they'll look up at the luminary, and they don't just bow to it and sing praises to it. It was more than that, wasn't it, Sean?
It's a lot more than that. Very, very horrific and traumatizing.
That's right. Yeah. So 2 Kings 17:16-17 gives us more details by saying they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves molten images and even 2 calves and made an Asherah and worshipped all the hosts of heaven and served Baal. Then they made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire and practiced divination and enchantments and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. So these people who worshipped the hosts of heaven, right? The sun, the moon, the stars, as we saw in Deuteronomy, they set up all kinds of idols on top of that. And they would, when we see worship, we see that defined for us in Leviticus as even the first time the word worship is used in Genesis. Abraham thought he was going to go do an offering, right, of the lamb, and that's because worship is defined as a system of offerings and sacrifices. That was the original definition of worship. And one of the ways that these people would worship their false gods and the hosts of heaven is that they would make their sons and daughters pass through the fire. What's a better way of saying that, or another way of saying that, Sean?
Well, this big statue here of this bull with its hands out, they would warm the statue up with the fire underneath that seat, and then the hands would be as hot as molten fire because it's conducted usually with copper or iron or bronze. And so when they put the baby into those hands, it would literally sear and burn the baby alive. And sometimes they had a special compartment inside of the chest of this statue of this bull, which is the Molech and the Baal bull. And they would open the compartment of that chest of that statue and put the baby in like an actual furnace or an oven. And then the baby would be burned to death. They would take it out, and that's if they burned it alive. Sometimes they would do other things, cannibalistic ways, and drinking, eating blood, and things like that. So it was horrific stuff. Yeah. As you can see, all the drummers, you can see they have their drum batons, and you see the horns and the bands and the musicians in the background
to muffle the screams.
They would have the band playing as loud as possible so that the parents wouldn't hear their children being cooked alive.
Good,
so this was not just simply the idea of getting fascinated with astrology and being like, oh my goodness, my horoscope, it says, we don't think you should do that either, by the way. But that's just a very, very watered down version of looking to and worshiping the stars or leaning on their wisdom or whatever, or actually that's all made up wisdom. But the true horrific reality that happened back in the day with open sacrifice of humans, now it happens underground and private and secret because this type of worship still goes on. But this type of thing back in the day, it was horrific. It traumatized the families, the culture, the people. And then there was other things that happened in the same process, as far as people doing mass fornication with each other many times, or the leaders also taking male and female prostitutes that were a part of these temples to do mass fornication. And then many times, if there was a child conceived by one of those women during these rituals, that was the baby they offered up 9 months later.
Yeah.
In a form of abortion. So it was the whole thing, guys, is absolutely wicked, evil. This is exactly why Yahweh said, I will destroy you guys for doing this in my land. This is not these are not the commandments I taught you. Never once did it thought even enter my mind, he says in Jeremiah, for you to ever do this. And you're doing this to worship Baal, and you're not worshiping Yahweh, right? You're not worshiping the creator. So in addition to this concept of the planets being looked at and incorporated into a false system of religion that draws people away from the truth. Well, what it did draw them to was destruction of humanity and innocence, child sacrifice. So it's like this. It's not innocence. This is why I'm not even surprised the word means deception at its core. Because that is literally what these things are, as far as worshiping the unclean spirits that are attributed to these types of deceptions, is they want to kill humanity. They don't like you.
And they love targeting children. It's always the sons and daughters. They're always the target. It's so strange. But that's because, children are so innocent and pure.
Well, yeah, I mean, children are also, the future, right? So if they can kill the kids, then you can limit the human race from populating. Like, they literally want to kill all of you. I mean, these were the enemies of humanity from before the flood, these unclean spirits. So they want to kill you for a long, long, long time, and this is without turning to Alex Jones and talking about them being, interdimensional demons.
They're turning the frogs gay.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally, I know he still believes in the heliocentric model, but he's at least right on the fact that they're not of the light spectrum that we can see, and that they are demonic and they want to kill you. Like this, that's even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So in that regard, he's done it. He's seen enough in his life to realize that these are spiritual entities that we can't see, that are around us, that want to kill us and our children. And they convince mankind to participate in this type of false religion in order to kill the children. And this is why, there's such a huge fight going on about abortion in so many countries.
I
and
just
in
thought
America even today.
Become a thing again today, what the Roe versus Wade and the whole discussion.
Which was never a law. It was only a precedent anyway, but states followed it as if it was a law. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so I hope this gives you guys more context of understanding why he would say there's a death penalty for worshiping the hosts of heaven, the stars, the moon, the sun, the planets, because it wasn't just the idea of bowing down, singing songs to the planets or anything. It was, they had a whole system of behavior that any sane person who has any ounce of righteousness in them would say, I'm not involving myself in that. But people succumb to peer pressure. People succumb to authority that rules over them because they believe the things they're told blindly. And the Father has told us all along the right way to do things and what would happen if we don't. So I hope that helps. But there was another slide here about that will kind of tie it together, that Enoch prophesied. Would you read this one?
Enoch 80 verse 7 says, the whole order of the stars shall be concealed from the sinners, and the thoughts of those on the earth shall err concerning them, and they shall be altered from all their ways. Yes, they shall err and take them to be gods.
Yeah, and in this context, it was kind of an end times vision, wasn't it? It was a prophecy about the latter days, and some of those things have not yet come to pass. But this is one of those things that they take them to be gods. The sinners, the order of the stars is concealed from them because they imagine them in a completely different order, taking place in a different system and model than is the truth. And then their thoughts err concerning them, and they take them to be gods in certain ways. Now, it's not every day that we go ahead.
Yeah, I would say the word God means ruler, right? So this is what I was talking about with astrology, and how there's an actual investment principle that a lot of people aren't aware of that is spoken about in the investment world. I used to be an investment advisor, and there's amongst people that have a lot of money, there's a common phrase that they use that millionaires will look at the stock market, but billionaires will look at the stars. and they literally make investment decisions based on the stars. I kid you not. Especially if, I mean, I don't know how many people have listened to crypto advisors, and they will also talk about this as well. And they've started to realize there's a correlation between certain things happening in the markets of cryptocurrency and also the regular stock market, in conjunction with different things happening with the stars, specifically these things called the planets, the quote unquote, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, all this kind of thing. So when certain things are in conjunction and alignment, they will actually know when to either invest or pull their money out. And that's a pattern they follow. They do not follow the news or the stocks or a company or whatever. The billionaires literally invest according to the stars. This is like crazy. When I found this out, I was just like, dude, this is so obvious. So obvious. You know what I mean? As far as letting themselves be ruled according to their greed, traps them into this system of trusting in something to rule and govern them, which is what a ruler is, according to the order of the stars. And they're not, and the truth of it's concealed from them, right? They don't understand that this is the Father's creation. This is there to be signs and seasons for the Moedims, for the every 91 days to help you know what cycle you're in with the calendar, to look towards these things in the sky above us in a righteous way, in a correct way. Instead, they pervert all that. And their thoughts, like this verse says,
and make it about selfish gain too.
Yeah, we're living in the fulfillment of this verse that we're reading.
Right. Because I was just going to say, there's a passage in Jubilees. You said that there is a righteous way to go about some of the things that the enemy has perverted. In Jubilees 12:16, it says that Abram set up through the night on the new moon of the 7th month to observe the stars from the evening to the morning, in order to see what the character of the year what would be the character of the year with regard to the rains. So there was an intended way to be able to read maybe the luminaries of the heavens, but it has definitely been perverted, and I can't even say I know what that intended way was anymore. I don't know.
It's this is why I'm just waiting for the Father to bring his son back.
That's right.
Get all straightened out for us.
Yeah, I'm looking to him to determine the character of my year.
Yeah.
But, we got these cultures throughout time that have looked to these luminaries and personified them and given them, and personified different deities. And then throughout time, the cultures would hand down and these entities sometimes, right? The Nephilim, the sons of the Watchers would appear to different cultures, and they would reinvent themselves, repackage themselves to be more friendly to that culture and their beliefs and their mindset about things. And so, we can start with Mercury here in Sumerian. This was an entity known as Enki. And that's not to say that they believed that the luminary known as Mercury today was itself Enki, but Sumerians had a god in their pantheon, known as Enki. And then, this gets handed down through different cultures across time, and they reinvent themselves, with different names and different, aspects get applied to them. So Mercury, Enki, and the Babylonians called him Nebu. The Greeks called him Hermes. In Latin, this became Mercurius. And in English today, this is Mercury. Now, anybody that's a fan of Sean's Investigating Babylon series, if you haven't seen that on Kingdom Cast, highly recommended. He breaks down where Hermes was also known as Anubis, or Hermanubis, which was also
that's what the Romans. Yeah, Nurgle to the Akkadians and the Mesopotamians, but when the Romans took over the Greek pantheon of gods, they actually realized that Hermes, as the Greeks called him, was literally the same god as the Egyptian Anubis. Yeah. So they literally just said, well, we'll call him Hermanubis.
Yeah. So it's interesting to have Nabu is the Babylonian. Yeah. Maybe that's a form of Anubis, Nabu.
Yeah.
And so then there's Venus, which was Inanna. I've even heard that from I've seen somebody on Facebook that was a self-proclaimed witch, and they went by that moniker. Inanna was the one that they invoked. Ishtar as the Babylonians, Greek Aphrodite, which became Venus in the Latin, which is the same as we call it in English. But yeah, that's the cult of Aphrodite, the cult of Ishtar. Mm-hmm. Yeah, renamed and repackaged as that's the sister wife of Osiris, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that became Venus. And so then you had Mars, Gugalana. I hadn't heard of that one. And they say they equate that with Nurgle. In your studies, did you find that Aries, Mars, was equated with Nurgle at all?
I did not. I found
All right.
Nurgle was equated with Enki and Mercury and Hermes, but
Yeah.
Aries and Mars were equated more with Helios.
Oh, thank
But
you. Okay.
There's different, depends on where you got the chart. There's different
Of
opinions.
course. Yeah. And there's probably blurred lines when it comes to certain these deities and how they transferred over throughout time to different cultures, because they just kind of became blended together, right? I noticed there's a lot of speculation on, did this guy become this guy to this culture, or did they kind of tie two different entities together to make a new one? And that happened a lot too. So Jupiter was Enlil or Marduk, or Zeus and Jupiter in the Latin. So Marduk, was that another name for Gilgamesh, or was that a separate character?
No, I thought he was separate.
Separate. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was
So you
separate.
get that going on. Saturn, Inerta, Kronos, and Saturnus. So it's interesting that they named, like in Greek mythologies, they had Kronos as the father of Zeus. And so Saturn is the outermost planet of these 5 planets that they held in their cosmology. And so they put Saturn above Jupiter because of this hierarchy in their pantheon, right? They had Kronos begot Zeus, and Zeus begot a bunch of these other ones, but they're all just continuously named after these false deities and these Nephilim and these sons of the Watchers.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
It is.
I mean, they're literally doing what the scriptures told us that please don't do. God, the creator was like, hey, don't do this.
Right.
It's going to cause problems and you're going to end up killing yourselves. And so they just kept doing it.
They did. That's not to say that, if you or I or anybody watching were to refer to any of these luminaries by these names, does that mean that they're involved in worship now to those deities?
I know
It's not
there's
the
a
same,
scripture
is it?
that talks about saying don't worship the unclean spirits or these false gods, and don't even let their names come out of your mouth or something like that. But that was as an incantation and worship to them. It doesn't mean you can't talk about them to teach people what's righteous and what's unrighteous.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Otherwise, God himself is contradicting his own instruction by just mentioning them to you in the words of his prophets. So that's, we have to keep things in context. So no, just the fact that we are talking about this to show you we're not invoking or doing some sort of incantation to call upon these in some form of worship. We're just explaining to you what these are.
Right. If we could get some help in the chat, mods, we got some spam coming in on the live chat. We'd appreciate your help deleting those if y'all could. Nonetheless, we're almost finished here. Got just a quick little bit left to go. Oh yeah, just to cover, the days of the week were named after the planets in some regards, right? And the false deities that are attributed to them. And it's especially noticeable in the Spanish language, I noticed too, right? You got the sun, Sunday, obviously, and Domingo is the name for Sunday in Spanish, and Dominus, right, is the biggest, baddest. And then you got the moon, Lunes, right? Monday, lunar. And then Mars, Tuesday, Martes. Wednesday, Mercury is Miraculous. And then Jupiter's Thursday, Jueves, or Jupiter, right? And then Venus, Friday, Viernes, they called Friday in Spanish. And I just find it interesting that instead of calling it Saturn's Day in Spanish, they kept the word Sábado, which is Sabbath, the same word for the seventh day Sabbath.
Interesting.
Rest.
Yeah. What's interesting is this particular graphic that you have here. It also has the different metals that are associated with these 7 concepts and names of these unclean spirits, these false gods. And that's interesting because in Enoch 52, I believe it talks about the iron, the tin, the lead, and I believe either the gold or the silver. They're all brought before Yeshua at his return and gathered up, and they're considered, like melting like wax before his feet. They become powerless as the power, because this is what Azazel in Enoch chapter 7 was teaching mankind, the values of the metals of the earth and how to work them into different things. And so also in Zechariah chapter 1, I believe it is, talked about Zephaniah chapter 1, talked about the day of the Lord. People are throwing their gold and the silver out in the street because it's worthless, and Yeshua's coming back, and they're like freaking out, what are we going to do? And they're also from what I understand, they're also in a last-ditch effort in order to bribe him for favorable judgment, because they realize the day of judgment's here. So
yeah, it's interesting how there's just like layered symbology. You know what I mean? Like with the plagues, a lot of people speculate and show how each individual plague was some sort of attack on the gods of Egypt. You know what I mean? Have you heard this too, right? And so it would be interesting that, you know, the final judgment and the wealth of the nations being cast before the feet of our Savior are representative of things that were iconic to the false gods. So
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Thought this was funny for a little comedic humor. Jupiter, god of thunder; Neptune, god of the sea; Mars, god of the war. What's Uranus, god of?
That's funny.
Yeah, but funny enough, the word that became Uranus, the etymology behind that is it stems from a Greek word oranos, which is the word in the Greek New Testament used 278 times to refer to heaven, or the visible heavens, or sometimes the atmosphere underneath the firmament of heaven.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. It's used a lot in the New Testament.
Yeah. So that's where they got the word for Uranus or Uranus. And so when I was searching, doing some studies, I found, you know, a question that people were asking on Quora. Did ancient people worship the planets as literal gods? And so this guy, who has a bunch of titles behind his name, Michael Fallon in Israel, has an MA and a BA and an AA, right? Bachelor's, all these. And so he says, of course.
Sounds like a British rapper. I'm in the
It could be.
I think it's a violation.
Don't worry about no thing. So he says, of course, as modern people still do, by worshiping the gods of the planets, the Graha Devas or Divas, we receive some of their grace and their blessings. Of course, if you prefer only to worship your Ishta Devata with all your heart and all your soul and surrender the fruits of your actions, that's good too. We don't believe this, do we, Sean?
No,
but this gentleman is saying that the worship of gods, or the planets as gods, still happens, and the ancients did, and he calls them Graha Divas. Now sounds like Sanskrit or a Hindu, right?
Yeah.
I had to look it up. Would you go to the next slide? I had to check out what he's talking about there, because according to this Sanskrit dictionary on a linguistic website, etymology website, it says that the Diva Graha or Graha Divas are a class of demons who cause harmless madness.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it fits right in along. Yeah, unclean spirits.
It's wild.
Causing people to worship, you know, the hosts of heaven as gods instead of the Father who made them.
Yeah, this is just fascinating.
It is. And so lastly, we want to talk about one of these aspects of what's visible. You know, when we can point cameras at the sky, set up time lapse, long exposure footages. We see these observations of what are known as the planets, which we were saying is wandering stars that are not a part of the class of stars which are fixed in their constellations. But it is said that the planets are not always prograding, but occasionally move in the opposite direction. They retrograde. The Copernicans refer to this as an illusion caused by the Earth's supposed orbit around the sun, and consequently the other luminaries that are said to also orbit the sun. They say that this is what we're seeing is just an illusion. Don't be fooled, they say, right? But then planets and comets should be equally subject to this illusion, Sean. But they're not.
But they're not, right?
They're not. And neither are any of the other stars that are also said to be orbiting the sun.
Yeah.
So if you go to the next one, there's one more.
I've always wondered if this is like this moment when they're actually doing the retrograde moment, if they're going through a different portal.
Very well could be, because you notice, right? Because you notice once it comes out of that, it's now on a different track almost, right?
That's right.
Down below, it's gone to a different path almost.
Different trajectory angle because it's making a turn in its circumference.
It very well could.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's one more. If you're sitting in a moving train and you look outside the window, the trees outside seemingly move in the opposite direction, right? Just from our perspective of moving, and all of them without exception But if the visible movement of the trees is only an illusion created by the movement of the train, then it would be impossible that the apple trees, for example, are moving while the pear trees appear static. Similarly, planets cannot participate in an illusory simulation caused by the Earth's movement, retrograde, while comets don't. And it's particularly interesting to note the silence from heliocentrists with respect to this inexplicable phenomenon.
Or it's just the Father did this on purpose,
right,
to help us destroy this deception that he knew would be coming down the road.
Right. Man, if we had time, there was another clip that I figured we wouldn't have time for, so I didn't. But just different people trying to explain away these retrograde motions. They'll come up with all kinds of excuses. I've seen them do models where they act like this is a perfect example of what we can observe, and it's just not. It doesn't show the same thing. And they'll ultimately say that what we observe and what we can record and testify to, and Ptolemy, Ptolemy the astronomer, also testified to, and he drew out the paths for them all. What we observe, they'll tell you in modernity that this is just an illusion, that it's an illusion caused by the apparent motions of these other planets going around the sun, and the fact that we're going around it too causes this. And they have all kinds of diagrams that they'll try to illustrate it for, but ultimately it's all just to say that what you see with your own eyes isn't actually happening, and what we can record and graph out isn't actually the case. That's just an illusion. What's really going on is something else over here involving a heliocentric model.
What you're seeing is a mirage.
They do that all the time, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
They're like, hey, ignore that. I know that looks fantastical and different than what we're telling you, but it's an illusion.
It's
mirage.
their go-to.
That is.
Yeah, that's no mirage. But that would make perfect sense, though, if this is the actual moment where it goes through some sort of gate to change trajectory.
It very well could be. What I think is even more beautiful, and this is Mars. It's a time lapse. And these things happen over the course of months. It's not just like in a split second or even over the course of just a day,
right,
that this will happen, where they'll do this loop. This is a time lapse of multiple photographs taken over the course of months, and they'll piece it together to give you this kind of image. But yeah, you're looking at what is called the planets, this one specifically Mars, in retrograde. And this is what it's doing.
They try to tell us that the illusion is happening for months or for several weeks. And that's why we can take these photographs day after day and get this image. That's crazy, because that means, like, if that's the case, then nothing we see above us should be trusted.
That's what they would have us believe, that none of our senses can be trusted. Just very much so. Yep. Yeah. But what I think is, if we recognize the truth of it, as Ptolemy and others have mapped out and shown according to a geocentric cosmology, is these are beautiful designed patterns and pathways that were intricately created to testify to the glory of God, is what I see. When you see geometric consecutive patterns that are symmetrical like this, and they have consecutive, I don't know, there's just so many words I could use to try to describe it, but it to me, it testifies to the fact that it's intelligently designed and created, whereas they would have you believe that's an illusion and not really happening. And because they don't want you to know that we're designed and created, and so are the luminaries and their paths.
Liars. Absolute liars.
Yeah.
So,
would you
this is beautiful, though, right? When you put all of them together, it's truly beautiful. It
does. It makes some pretty geometric patterns and shapes. And this is, probably just the 5. I think it was Saturn, Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter, and Mars.
Well, of course, gravity would cause this. I mean, that gravity would cause this, right? No. So, like, because and all of it's happening over the perspective of the Earth, not the sun. So so even though we're chasing the sun, spinning around that according to their model, yet somehow these particular bodies in the heaven are focusing on us, if you will, in their concentric circles around us in the sky. So it's just hilarious that, because as you see in this diagram, the sun is at the bottom, the Earth is in the center. I know, obviously, we delved into this at great detail last year in episode 2 of Geocentricity, No Sphericity. But just as a reminder, folks, if the cosmic evolution as it's been described to us, if that truly occurred, then all these motions should be happening around the sun, as that would be the great attractor within our particular solar system, not the
Yeah.
Earth. So this is just nonsense. Like, this is absolute evidence from what we can see in the sky with the natural eye and record throughout the days of the year that the heliocentric model is a lie and is not consistent.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Our own observations and what people have recorded over the centuries of the movements of these luminaries above, performing these great paths of beautiful concentric patterns and shapes. I love it because there's a quick clip that we have one last thing here to go over to show what these look like. Do you have that one?
The retrograde patterns?
Yeah. If you'd show that one, it'd be a good time.
So in order to better understand that strange retrograde motion of the planet, that complex motion that you see right here, I created a JavaScript model. I did this the easy way. I first created a Copernican model with the sun in the center and then all the planets revolving around this. I used the real values of the planets, so the real velocity, the real distances, and so on. And then I made what is called a coordinate transformation, where I use simple mathematics to view what this motion looks like as seen from the Earth. And that's just a few lines of mathematics, and then you immediately get from this to this insanely complicated picture. Well, let's first look at the inner planets so you better understand what's going on in those lectures. So let's look at Mercury first. Let's slow it down here. So here we see Mercury and Venus, the two inner planets, both circling around the sun. It takes a slightly bigger orbit. You can see it creates beautiful patterns, and the pattern of Venus is especially beautiful as it creates a four-pointed flower that we'll see in a moment. So here we have the fourth side, and then we get the last one right here. So here we see that five-pointed flower. It's pretty incredible. So let's now look at the outer planets. Here we have Jupiter and Saturn. We also have Mars, but Mars is a bit more complicated to understand. But in the end, it works in the same way. So what do we see here? We see that the motion, the retrograde motion of Jupiter and Saturn,
on the daily, that's the banknote. Just for some computer animation from a space probe. That's a cartoon, all I'm seeing is a fake globe. And NASA never landed on the moon, it was a fake, bro. So peep the show, ain't no sleeping, no, I'm on no dose. I preach the kingdom, I'm still tipping on fofos. I'm posted up in the third coast, my postcode. 6 days I'm working, but the 7th day the stove closed. These days, getting to hear the truth is a phenomenon. I will not be programmed, cause I'm not an automaton. Linen ensemble like some all-white pajamas on. Kicking it here with Marlo, we get our uncommon on. Delete the DC, don't believe the globe scam. Deplete the elite and defeat the program. Eat, sleep, and repeat, yeah, you know my old jam. Flat smacking pro, got the globe in a choke slam.
Flat Smacking Pro got the globe and a choke slam. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I wanted to put that together there at the end to show the motion of it all, and as it completes and makes the entire pattern of those luminaries making their paths. And it's interesting to point out, though, that I also wanted to show that because the luminaries, their paths do seem to kind of correlate with the sun. Did you notice that, Sean? That, you know, they will have us believe that those patterns are made because of their orbits around the sun, whereas we say that's not happening, but they do move congruent with the sun in a way. And I noticed that when I'm looking at Enoch as well. Was there another slide after that? One last scripture verses. Yeah, Enoch 81. Would you read it?
So in Enoch 81:5, it says, with respect to the progress of the sun in heaven, it enters and goes out of each gate for 30 days with the leaders of the 1,000 classes of the stars.
Okay, so a couple things here is the sun enters and goes out with the leaders of the 1,000 classes of stars. So the sun goes with the stars, or at least with the leaders of them, which makes me wonder if this isn't specifically referring to a certain class, the leaders of the 1,000 classes of the stars. Well, that would probably be the angelic conductors that it's saying, the leaders of them, right? But when it does say 1,000 classes of the stars, that just makes me realize, the wandering stars would just be another class of these stars.
Yeah, because the circumference of the sun as it moves in the firmament overhead, the stars follow that all throughout the year.
Right.
As Enoch explains in Enoch chapter 80 and 81. It's only the moon that has its own special progression.
Peculiar course, as it's described in Enoch, the moon does. But the sun kind of moves with the stars. And even though we can't see the backdrop of the stars during the daylight with the sun in front of them, if we could, I'd imagine we'd see kind of a fixed order of the constellations moving with the sun in a fixed fashion. And we also, it's in Enoch 73, when it's talking about the sun, the moon, and the stars keeping time with each other, they kind of have a separate scale. You remember where it'll say like the moon and the sun, or the moon is a certain amount of days behind the sun. It includes the stars. It'll say the moon falls this many days behind the sun and the stars, meaning the sun and the stars move together in their own keeping of time. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think it's in First Enoch 82. It tests with the heads over thousands are intercalated between leader and leader, each behind a station, but the leaders make the divisions.
Yeah.
So that's something else maybe we can dig in a future episode as a teaser for the future about the world stations that are mentioned at the ends of the heaven that Enoch got to see, as far as like what those possibly are, as far as, being the mechanisms by which all these motions possibly are initiated, that the angels that follow them make sure they're working properly. But ultimately there are, according to the names of these leaders are divided by 4 parts: Milkiel, Helamelech, Melejal, and Narel, and then the name. So it's, I don't know, it's very fascinating that these the sun has angels that govern it, that make sure it's doing what it should be doing. So does all these stars, and the book of Enoch actually starts naming these particular angels. So this is not an unguided process like the world tells us, that it's just randomly moving and it's held together by this magical glue that no one can observe called gravity,
and is the result of a accidental explosion of a random nothingness. They'd have you believe. No, it's all guided and carefully maintained with his maintenance men that are tending to the clock, the clock workers. It's beautiful.
That's a good description, the clock workers. There's so much. There's so much to this topic. It's just like we're here already at 2.5 hours, and just want a big shout out to Rich P in the chat. Thank you for your super chat earlier. Also, Jackie Jenkins, Hannah, thank you for your super sticker. Really appreciate you guys supporting the show.
Much love. Yes, we so appreciate your contributions, all of your support and your kind words that everybody continuously offers. We just love you guys for it. We thank you. So we hope to cover some other things like Sean was just talking about, the different stations in the heaven and at the ends, and things that are part of the creation that come from there. That'll be a great one probably for the seasons episode. We'll cover seasons and tides and time zones in an episode of itself. I look forward to that. So there's that. And this also sets up a good foundation for an episode in the future about like the Mars missions and the different planetary missions that they claim to be doing, where we'll expose some of the fraudulence going on behind that with Elon Musk and SpaceX and NASA as well.
Did you ever see those old shows, Mystery Science Theater 3000?
I recall,
where the characters just sit in front of the TV screen and review a movie and just bag on it the whole time.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what those episodes might be like. We're just Uncommon Ground Science Theater 3000. We just laugh at the deception that's so obvious to see that, once you point it out, people start seeing it.
Exactly. And there's lots of pieces, lots of moving pieces, and lots of lies being told about them. So we have lots to cover, and we love and enjoy hanging out with you guys. We appreciate y'all for joining us. We'll be back here hopefully next week with a surprise guest. We're looking to get a guest. That reminds me, if you guys, like, for example, there's in the chat here, we have Musicians for Truth. If y'all happen to know of any other musicians, activists, guys that are in a role of some sort of ministry, maybe even, that you'd like to see come on and talk with us. If y'all have any connections you'd like to help make that work, or to recommend to us, feel free to leave that in the chat or in the comments afterwards. We're looking for recommendations for other guests to highlight and spotlight. We'd share their testimonies and showcase some of their work, like their music or their activism. We'd love to have some more guests on this season with that, but stay tuned next week for a surprise guest that we'll have as well. What else do you have to say, Sean?
Nothing, brother. This is always fun. I think this is great. Excited for next week as well.
It's enjoyable. Yep. While supplies last, anybody that's wanting to contribute to the gift, to get the gift of the USB drive of season 1, while supplies last, you'll get a sticker, as well as y'all check out next week's show, where we will select winner or winners possibly of the giveaway that we're doing for the merchandise available in the store. Links in the description. PayPal, Patreon set up with that, so you can enter to get the to enter to possibly win the giveaway under the Patreon, as well as other links to contribute, share, show some love. We love you guys back. We're going to lead out on tonight's episode with a song by a Miss Amber Plaster, as well as featuring an artist named ODD TV, which I personally have mixed and mashed up together to give you guys a remix of the song Geocentric. I hope you guys enjoy it. We bless you guys. We ask that you bless the Father Yah, and may he bless you. And praises be to him. Much love, guys.
See you guys later.
Have a good night, Sean.
Reality is insane. They want to keep us in chains. Plus they have a web of deception they weave in our brains. But now I see through the games. They're trying to lead us astray. Gatekeeping information, they want to keep it that way. But I'm researching all the time, every day of the week. So people claim that I'm crazy and I'm labeled a freak. But that's what happens when you're awake in a nation of sheep, where they try their best to keep the population asleep. They poison our food and water and they offer us war, but we're not falling for their parlor tricks, not anymore. We walked through the door and let our chains drop to the floor. There's many areas in this life that we got to explore, and the earth too, because they might be hiding more land, more seas, more trees, more snow, more sand. In school, everything that we're taught is a lie, and lately it's making me crazy. I gotta know why. Break free from this twisted mental conditioning. I offer my message to anyone out there who's listening. I hear just beyond the limits and it's calling me whispering. Sometimes I feel like I'm tripping, this has got to be just a dream. But nope, I'm wide awake, my friend, and this is reality. Why do we let them enslave us, man? It beats the heck out of me. People barely scraping by and work for minimum wages. There is no new world order, this is how it's been through the ages. Flip through the pages of history and see on your own. Too many things are a mystery, other things are unknown. It makes me question who we are, where we live and what we're told. But walking a path of truth can be a really bumpy road. We're ridiculed, mocked, and we're ostracized and laughed away. But that's okay, some folks are sheep until they pass away. In school, everything that we're taught is a lie, and lately it's making me crazy, I gotta know why.
Fire burning in my soul.